From hidden footage from a completely different anime spliced into the background, to Orson Welles' final recorded whispers, to deleted scenes deemed too violent to survive the final cut. We are pulling back the curtain on the details hiding in plain sight. Let's start right at the surface level, frame by frame, because the first thing that shocks people when they really start digging into this movie is how much is hiding in frames that last less than a second. After Unicron devours Lithone, the blinking energy effect of Unicron's innards shows, for a split second, what appear to be several images of post-apocalyptic buildings. Those images are actually from the Fist of the North Star movie, which Toei Animation also animated, and which was released in Japan in March 1986, exactly 5 months before the Transformers, the movie released in America. Think about that, in the middle of a children's animated Transformers film, inside the gut of a planet-eating robot, Toei quietly dropped frames from one of the most brutally violent anime films ever made. Fist of the North Star is not a kid's movie. It's drenched in blood and post-apocalyptic carnage. And it's sitting right there inside Unicron's belly. Blink and you'll miss it for anyone with a pause button and a sharp eye. It is worth sitting with what that means for a second. The people who made this film were working on 2 productions at the same time in the same building with overlapping crews. The frames did not wander in from another studio. They came from the desks right next door. That is the kind of detail that tells you more about how the movie was made than any official statement ever could. It was built fast, built lean, and built by people who reused what they had. But Toei didn't stop there. The dismembered robot body parts in the Quintesson jail cells are in fact redecoed parts of the RX-178 Gundam MK2 and the RMS-099 Rick Dias. 2 mobile suits from the 1985 anime TV series Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. So the same animation house quietly used assets from multiple other animated productions and slipped them into the film without anyone in the West catching on for years. That's not an accident. That's Toei animators doing what animators do. Recycling, repurposing, and leaving fingerprints everywhere. Picture the scene. Hot Rod and Cup are locked in a Quintesson cell, and the camera lingers on the broken bodies of other prisoners scattered around them. To a kid in 1986, those were just dead robots. Set dressing, atmosphere, but to anyone who grew up on Gundam, those broken bodies were instantly familiar. They were the heroes of a completely different franchise, torn apart and tossed in a corner of a Transformers film. The animators were essentially drawing what they already knew how to draw, and what they knew how to draw was Gundam. Now, here's one that lives rent-free in every continuity nerd's head. When Optimus Prime takes the Matrix out of his chest to give to Ultra Magnus, there is another Matrix beneath it. In his chest without a center. It's right there. 2 matrices, one complete, one hollow, sitting inside Optimus Prime's chest like a secret drawer behind a secret drawer. Nobody in the film acknowledges it. Nobody has ever fully explained it. It just sits there, visible for anyone who pauses at the right moment, daring fans to make sense of it. Fans have spent decades trying to write a story around that hollow second Matrix. Some say it was a spare. Some say it was an animation shortcut, a doubled up cell that nobody cleaned up. Some have built entire fan theories about Prime carrying a backup all along. The truth is almost certainly the boring one. It was a mistake. But the movie is so beloved that even its mistakes get treated like clues. That is the strange power this film has over the people who grew up with it. And then there's what might be the most quietly absurd detail in the whole movie. Cybertron's third moon, which exists solely due to an editing error in this movie, would actually reappear on Beast machines, Transformers in 1999, still bearing Unicron's claw marks. An accident, a moon that was never meant to exist, conjured entirely by a continuity mistake, got canonized over a decade later, because a later production saw it and rolled with it. The fandom noticed, the later writers noticed, and instead of erasing it, they embraced it. That third moon is now part of the mythology, all because someone miscounted during editing in 1986. In the battle for Autobot City, when Prime drives up behind the Decepticons, Blitzwing turns his head and its color changes to purple for a split second. But when he turns it back, it's tan again. That one flicker of purple, a moment of animation oversight that anyone watching at normal speed would never notice. But the fans who did notice, they cataloged it, mapped it, debated it online for decades. Color errors like that are all over the film, and once you start looking for them, you cannot stop seeing them. Characters change shade between shots. Eyes shift from blue to red and back. Decepticons swap insignia placement. Some of these are the natural result of dozens of different animators drawing the same character without perfect reference. Others are simply the cost of a rushed schedule. The film is a patchwork, and the patches show, but the patches are part of why fans love studying it so much. Every error is a little window into how the sausage got made. After Unicron devours Lithone, what appears inside his innards for a split second includes those images of post-apocalyptic buildings from the Fist of the North Star movie, because Toei Animation animated both films. That single fact, two wildly different films sharing frames without announcement, is a detail that fundamentally changes how you watch the movie. Every time Unicron's gut flickers on screen, you're watching two films at once. Watch Sludge when he's haymakered by Devastator and his eyes pop out of their sockets in Looney Tunes-esque fashion. That's Toei animators having fun. That's the 1986 equivalent of a director's commentary buried inside the actual film. The joke is that nobody was supposed to catch it, but of course the fans did. That single gag tells you something important about the tone of this movie. It is brutal 1 minute and cartoonish the next. Characters die in cold, permanent ways, and then a Dinobot's eyes bug out of his head like he just got hit with a frying pan in a Saturday morning short. The film never quite settles on what it wants to be. It is a war movie and a comedy and a tragedy and a toy commercial all at once. That tonal chaos would sink most films. Somehow it makes this one more memorable, and there's one more frame-level detail that has haunted fans for years. There are a couple of frames where you can see the inside of one of the Lithonian ships being devoured by Unicron. The ship's pilot appears to be Kranix or Arblus, even though he screams out Kranix's name, and both appear later in the Quintesson complex. The original script and 1986 comic adaptation show that Arblus was meant to die, which is how the scene was animated, but the final script meant for the Lithone scientist to die. So the animation was completed for an older version of the script, and those frames, those phantom frames where Arblus technically dies, made it into the final cut. The film is haunted by its own production history. This is the thing that makes the movie so fascinating to dissect. It was not made in a clean, linear way. The script changed while the animation was already being drawn. Decisions made in one country had to be carried out by artists in another. By the time the final version was assembled, pieces of 3 or 4 different versions of the story were all stitched together in the same 90 minutes. Arblus dies and then shows up alive. A character screams a name that does not match the face on screen. The movie contradicts itself because its own production contradicted itself. Snarl is absent from most of the movie, mysteriously not appearing, alongside his Dinobot buddies whenever they crop up during the story. It's unclear exactly why this is the case, but one possible explanation is that copies of the script which have come into fans' hands repeatedly list the Dinobots but never make mention of Snarl by name. He was written out at the script stage, but in the chaos of production, 2 background blink and miss appearances slipped through. Snarl technically appears in his own movie. He just didn't get an invitation to his own scenes. The whir of an AT-AT's leg hydraulics from Star Wars can be heard partway through Unicron's transformation. The sound used for the communicators on Star Trek is used when Daniel activates his blaster to save Spike. 2 of the biggest sci-fi franchises on the planet hiding in the sound design of a Transformers movie. Nobody cleared that with Lucasfilm. Nobody cleared that with Paramount. They just used the sounds because they fit. And in 1986, nobody was listening closely enough to sue. Sound libraries in the 1980s were a different world. Studios bought big collections of effects and used them freely, and famous sounds traveled from film to film without anyone thinking twice. The same scream, the same laser blast, the same door whoosh could show up in a dozen unrelated productions. So when you hear a piece of Star Wars or Star Trek inside Transformers, you're hearing how the industry actually worked back then. Nothing was sacred. Everything everything a resource, and the people making a toy movie on a tight budget grabbed whatever sounded right. What you saw in the theater in 1986 was not the whole movie. The 1986 movie underwent numerous changes during production, even after some parts of it had already been animated, which is very evident in the final product at times. That's the thing about animated films of this era. They weren't like live action where you could reshoot. Once a scene was animated, cutting it meant cutting finished work that cost real money and real time. The fact that they cut as much as they did tells you everything about how chaotic the production actually was. The most famous deleted scene, and the one that rewrites how you watch Ultra Magnus's death, is the original dismemberment sequence. It's a deleted scene from the 1986 Transformers animated movie, recreated from a set of production-used storyboards. In the storyboards, Ultra Magnus had a much more barbaric death at the hands of the sweeps. He is literally pulled apart. This scene was animated but removed due to concerns over the violence. Let that land for a second. The scene was fully animated. It existed. Children sitting in preview screenings saw Ultra Magnus pulled limb from limb by the sweeps, and the reaction was violent enough that the studio yanked the footage entirely. There are many clues in the final film that this scene should still be there. The audio matches this version exactly. Magnus sounds like he's being pulled apart. So even in the version that made it to theaters, the audio tells the story of the cut version. His screams in the final film were recorded for a death scene that you never got to see. The sound survived even when the animation didn't. That would also explain the later scene of the Junkians rebuilding Ultra Magnus, who looks more like he was torn apart rather than blown apart. His rebuilt body in the film is consistent with the deleted dismemberment, not with the explosion that the cut version implies. The film's own continuity quietly confirms that the more graphic death was the real one, so the version you watched is haunted by the version you did not. The screams are wrong for the death you see. The rebuilt body is wrong for the death you see. Everything points to a more violent original that the studio scrubbed out at the last minute but could not fully erase. The bones of the brutal version are still in there, poking through the edited surface, and once you know to look for them, the theatrical Magnus death never looks quite right again. The first deleted scene showing Devastator falling was included in a section of film either side, so you can see where it would have fit in. The scene is believed to have been animated, as it exists in very late production notes, and music was written to accompany it. It was cut because director Nelson Shin felt it ruined the flow of Prime's attack, leading up to his battle with Megatron. Ultra Magnus, Trax, Sideswipe, and Red Alert were picked to attack Devastator, as they all have rocket launchers. This is the part that makes you rebuild the movie in your head. That deleted Devastator battle wasn't just a cool fight scene, it was connective tissue. It also explains what Megatron was looking at when Prime found him. Without it, there's a gap in the geography of the Autobot City battle that viewers have never been able to fully reconcile. You weren't imagining that something felt slightly off during that sequence. Something was missing, and it was sitting in a storyboard file for years before fans pieced it together. There's also a deleted scene involving Ultra Magnus deploying Autobots to fight Devastator, where they managed to tear him apart. But when fleeing, Red Alert is killed during the shootout. Red Alert dead in a scene that never made the final film. His death was animated and then erased. He survived the movie by accident because the scene that killed him didn't survive the edit. Think about how strange that is. Red Alert's entire fate hinges on an editing decision. In one version of this movie, he dies in a shootout fleeing from Devastator. In the version that reached theaters, that scene is gone, so he simply lives. A character's life and death came down to which footage a director chose to keep. That is the razor's edge this whole film was assembled on. A few different cuts in the editing bay and the body count, and the survivors would have looked completely different. Ultra Magnus's original death scene, where the sweeps tear him apart limb by limb, is rumored to have been fully finished, only being cut from the final film due to negative test screening reactions. Test screenings, which means real children in real theaters watched the full dismemberment scene, and the studio knew before the movie even opened that it was too much, and yet the audio track stayed. The sound of Ultra Magnus being pulled apart stayed in the film. For every kid who saw it in theaters, the version they watched had the screams of a scene they'd never see. Shockwave also has a death scene during Unicron's attack that was cut from the final film. The Transformers Wiki lists this as Shockwave's last appearance, or not. That, or not footnote in the Wiki is as close as we get to an official acknowledgement that his fate in the theatrical cut is genuinely ambiguous. He doesn't die on screen, he just disappears. The cut death scene exists somewhere in production history, fully animated, never seen. Shockwave deserves special mention here because of all the original Decepticons, he is the one whose fate is the murkiest. He was one of the most popular characters from the early toy line, the cold logical guardian of Cybertron, and the movie seems to have planned a death for him, and then changed its mind, so he just stops appearing. No farewell, no on-screen end. He is there, and then he is not, and the only trace of his intended death is a deleted scene, and a wiki footnote that shrugs, for a character that beloved? That is a strangely quiet exit. There were also extra and extended shots of Unicron transforming and attacking Cybertron. Not much is known about these scenes other than being hinted at in storyboards and early screenplays, but the proof that these deleted scenes may exist remains in the theatrical trailer, where it reveals quite a number of scenes that weren't in the final film. Watch the trailer, then watch the movie. Entire sequences visible in the promotional footage simply don't appear in the theatrical cut. Unicron's transformation was longer. His attack on Cybertron had more stages. What you got in theaters was an edited down version of something far more sprawling, and the trailer accidentally preserved evidence of what was cut. Trailers are a strange kind of time capsule. They are cut together early, often from a rougher version of the film, and then they outlive the changes that come after. So a trailer can show you shots that no longer exist in the finished movie. For Transformers fans, the 1986 trailer became a kind of treasure map, a list of scenes to hunt for, proof that the movie they watched was a trimmed-down version of something bigger. Every frame in that trailer that does not appear in the film is a small mystery about what was lost. The negatives for the matted widescreen version of the film were either destroyed or lost, and for a time only the VHS full-screen version of the movie remained. The film nearly ceased to exist in its theatrical form. A version of this movie was nearly permanently inaccessible, not as a studio secret, not as a vault decision, but because the negatives were gone. The North Carolina School of Filmmaking in Winston-Salem carries a print of the movie, assembled from different reels of other prints of the movie found in its archives. The pieced-together print is in good condition, a patchwork print, a Frankenstein version assembled from fragments. The film that started one of the most heated toy controversies in American history was nearly lost entirely. Saved by scavenged reels in a film school's archive, there is a real lesson buried in that. We tend to assume that famous films are safe, locked away in some perfect vault, protected forever. But film is fragile. Negatives degrade. Reels get misplaced. Studios go under and their archives get scattered. The Transformers, the movie, came within a hair of surviving only as a cropped VHS tape, its true theatrical form gone for good. It was saved not by a major studio, but by a film school in North Carolina that happened to have the right scraps. The history of this movie is also a history of how easily history disappears. The Transformers, the movie, features the voices of Eric Idle, Judd Nelson, Leonard Nimoy, Casey Kasem, Robert Stack, Lionel Stander, John Muschietti Jr., Scatman Crothers, Peter Cullen, Frank Welker, and Orson Welles, who died 10 months before the film's release in his final film role. Stop and look at that cast list again, because it is genuinely staggering for a toy movie. Eric Idle from Monty Python, Judd Nelson, fresh off The Breakfast Club, Leonard Nimoy, who was Spock to the entire planet, Casey Kasem, the most famous radio voice in America, Robert Stack, who would soon host Unsolved Mysteries, John Muschietti Jr., the fastest talker in the world, Scatman Crothers from The Shining, and Orson Welles. This is not a normal voice cast for a Saturday morning property. This is a roster of legends assembled around a story about transforming robots. Orson Welles, the man who directed Citizen Kane at 25 years old, the voice that panicked an entire nation with his War of the Worlds radio broadcast, the filmmaker who bent cinema itself to his will for decades. His final screen credit, the last role he ever recorded, was a planet-eating robot named Unicron in a children's animated film about transforming toys. The filmmaking legend who remade cinema with Citizen Kane, directed Touch of Evil, starred in The Third Man, adapted Shakespeare to the screen, and panicked the nation with his infamous radio broadcast, concluded his career by playing Unicron, an evil shape-shifting planet Moon. Wells was 70 at the time and in poor health. Wells spent the day of October 5, 1985, performing Unicron's voice on set, and died 5 days later on October 10. Reports indicate that his voice was apparently so weak by the time he made his recording that technicians needed to run it through a synthesizer to salvage it. He also read his lines so slowly that the audio had to be shortened to speed it up about 8%. 8%! They literally sped up Orson Welles. The most commanding voice in the history of American cinema needed electronic processing and time compression just to be usable in a Transformers movie. Director Nelson Shin claimed Welles was in incredibly poor health at the time he arrived to record his dialogue. So heavyset he required a wheelchair to move. Shin also detailed Welles' recordings as labored and barely usable, requiring a great deal of post-recording modification. There is something almost unbearably human about that image. One of the giants of the 20th century, near the very end of his life, sitting in a recording booth, too weak to give the performance his younger self could have given in a single effortless take. The engineers had to work around his body's failures. They had to rebuild his voice in the edit the way the Junkians rebuild Ultra Magnus in the film. And 5 days later, he was gone. The recording was one of the last things he ever did. And yet, when you hear Unicron speak, the voice is still unmistakably Welles. That compression, that synthesizer processing, that 8% speed up, it didn't erase who he was. It just made him Unicron, a planet, a destroyer of worlds. For Unicron to succeed as a villain that makes Megatron look meek and subservient by comparison, he must be believably imposing, and Welles was among the few actors who could bring the gravitas necessary to convincingly play a robot the size of a planet. As Unicron exposits his evil plan, Welles' commanding voice reverberates through the screen. What did Welles himself think about all of this? Shortly before his death, Welles told his biographer Barbara Leeming, "You know what I did this morning? I played the voice of a toy. I play a planet. I menace somebody called something or other. Then I'm destroyed. My plan to destroy whoever it is thwarted, and I tear myself apart on the screen." He didn't even know the characters' names. He'd seen the script for the first time that morning. He insisted his recording be a closed session with only the director and engineer. Didn't take voice direction very well, and his first viewing of the script was on the day he came in to record his lines. And despite all of that, despite the wheelchair, the weak voice, the synthesizer, the script he'd just met, he delivered. Contempt for the role aside, Orson Welles couldn't turn in a bad performance, even if he tried. That quote to his biographer is famous now, and people sometimes read it as proof that Welles looked down on the role. But read it again. There is a dry, self-aware humor in it. He knew exactly how absurd the situation was. A man who had stood at the very top of cinema, ending his career menacing a hero whose name he could not be bothered to remember. He found it funny and a little sad, and he was honest about both. That honesty is part of why the performance lands. He was not pretending the job was beneath him, and he was not pretending it was a masterpiece. He just did the work, the way professionals do, right up to the end. Now, here's the piece of trivia that fans have been debating since the late 80s. The movie Urban Legend. Leonard Nimoy finished the last lines for Unicron in Transformers, the movie because Orson Welles tragically passed away before he could finish his performance. It sounds completely plausible. Nimoy was already in the recording booth as Galvatron. Welles died before the film released. It has often been speculated that Unicron's last line, "Destiny, you cannot destroy my destiny," was recorded by another actor, possibly Nimoy, because it sounds different than the other lines. But here's what actually happened. To the best of voice director Wally Burr's memory, Welles successfully completed all the required dialogue for his role. Nimoy did not do or redo any of Welles' dialogue. It's possible that the speeding up of Welles' dialogue may have slightly distorted the Welles voice, creating artifacts that could sound a little like Nimoy. They sped up his voice so much that it started to sound like someone else. That's the whole mystery. The processing that saved Welles' performance was also what made people think it wasn't his. This film was also Scatman Crothers' final role released in his lifetime. One more film, Rock Odyssey from 1987, would be released a year after his death. So in a single animated Transformers film, you have two legendary performers, Welles and Crothers, recording their final roles, both dead before the movie hit theaters. There is a quiet weight to that. Scatman Crothers voiced Jazz, one of the most beloved Autobots, a character full of style and warmth and cool. And Jazz survives the movie, which makes it gentler than the fates of Prime or Ironhide. But the man behind that voice was near the end too. So when you watch the film now, two of its voices are ghosts. Wells as the planet that eats worlds, and Crothers as the easygoing Autobot who makes it through. Both of them gave some of their final recorded work to a movie about toys, and both were gone soon after. Stan Bush's song, The Touch, which is prominently featured in the film, was originally written for the Sylvester Stallone film Cobra in 1986. It didn't make the cut for Stallone, got redirected to a Transformers movie instead. And now it's one of the most iconic pieces of animated film music in history. The song that plays when Optimus Prime charges into battle. The song Hot Rod channels when he opens the Matrix. The song The Touch was later performed by Mark Wahlberg's character, Dirk Diggler, in Paul Thomas Anderson's 1997 Oscar-nominated film Boogie Nights, a song written for Stallone, used in Transformers, and then immortalized by Paul Thomas Anderson. That's the journey of The Touch. Peter Cullen, the voice actor who plays Optimus Prime, also played Prime in the TV series the movie was based on. Cullen honestly had no idea how popular the character was until the public backlash over Optimus Prime's death in the movie, as the studio never sent him any of the fan mail addressed to Prime. But to this day, he consistently cites Optimus Prime as his absolute favorite role. The studio filtered the fan mail away from him. Cullen voiced one of the most beloved animated characters in history, and didn't learn the true scale of what that meant until the backlash came. And even then, it came to him secondhand. The man behind the voice didn't know he'd created an icon. Cullen has talked over the years about where the voice of Optimus Prime came from, and the story is its own kind of beautiful. He based it on his older brother Larry, a Marine, who told him before an audition that if he was going to play a hero, he should be a real one. Be strong enough to be gentle. That advice is baked into every line Prime speaks. So when children wept at Prime's death, they were responding to something true that Cullen had put into the performance. He gave the character a soul, and then the studio kept the evidence of how much that soul mattered hidden from him for years. Here's where the story of the Transformers. The movie stops being just about animation and starts being about a business decision that went catastrophically wrong in the best possible way. From toy maker Hasbro's standpoint, killing off all these characters came down to simple economics. Prime, Ratchet, Prowl, and their compatriots were all part of the original 1984 Generation 1 line, and Hasbro wanted to replace them with shiny new toys like Cup, Blur, and Rodimus Prime. What better way to do it than in the Transformers' big, expensive debut movie? That was the plan. Use the movie as a product discontinuation event. Kill the old characters on screen. Let the new ones inherit the brand. Simple, clean, commercially rational, except for one massive miscalculation. He's arguably the most famous Transformer of the bunch, something that Hasbro and those behind the film didn't fully realize during production. As reported by Den of Geek in a commentary for the film's 20th anniversary DVD, story consultant Flint Dill touched on Optimus Prime's death. "We didn't know that he was an icon," Dilla said, admitting that he and Hasbro miscalculated how much fans of the Transformers toy line and media loved Optimus Prime. It was a toy show. A toy show! That's how they saw it. Not a mythology. Not an emotional investment. Not a character that kids had built a relationship with over 2 years of daily afternoon television. Just a toy show, and the toys needed rotating out. You can almost understand how they got there. From inside a toy company, the cartoon really was just an advertisement. It existed to move product. The whole business model was simple. Make a toy. Make a show about the toy. Sell more toys. Within that logic, retiring a character is the same as discontinuing a color of plastic. It is a supply chain decision, not an emotional one. The problem is that the children watching did not see a supply chain. They saw a friend, and nobody in the boardroom had stopped to notice the difference. In a scene that no doubt left its mark on entire theaters full of wide-eyed kids, Prime died on an operating table, the matrix of leadership falling from his hands, and his once vivid red paint fading to a sullen gray. That moment, that single moment, the color draining from his body, hit children like a freight train, because nobody does that. Nobody kills the hero. Not in 1986. Not in a children's film. In a behind-the-scenes documentary for the film, Dilla explained that Optimus Prime's death broke an unspoken rule of 80s filmmaking. Do not kill off protagonists. given their franchise-building potential. Dill said, "What I was thinking about for Optimus's death was John Wayne in the Alamo, which was my scarring childhood moment. It's supposed to be that childhood movie you see where everybody gets scarred. In the mid-80s, people weren't doing that, because everyone was thinking in terms of franchise. The intent was deliberate trauma, the kind that stays with you, the kind that makes a story feel real, and it worked. Just not in the direction anyone expected." Story consultant Dill later admitted, "Kids were crying in the theaters. We heard about people leaving the movie. We were getting a lot of nasty notes about it. There was even a child who locked himself in his bedroom for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. A child locked himself in his room for 2 weeks because Optimus Prime died in a movie about toys. That is the scale of what Hasbro underestimated. There was, however, one person working on the film who apparently tried to avert Prime's death. Screenwriter Ron Friedman, already the writer of G.I. Joe and Transformers TV episodes, he was given the task of writing the movie script. Realizing that Prime was the heroic father figure in the Autobot family, he advised Hasbro against killing the character off. Friedman's argument to Hasbro was direct: to remove Optimus Prime, to physically remove Daddy from the family. That wasn't going to work. I told Hasbro and their lieutenants they would have to bring him back, but they said no and had great things planned. In other words, they were going to create new, more expensive toys. He saw it coming. The screenwriter predicted the backlash. He told them it wouldn't work. They overruled him. And then it didn't work exactly as he said it wouldn't. There is a particular kind of frustration in being right and being ignored, and Friedman has carried that frustration for decades. He understood something the executives did not. He understood that Prime was not a product. He was a parent to a generation of kids whose own parents were at work all afternoon. The Autobot leader was a steady, kind, protective figure who showed up every day and always did the right thing. Killing him was not like retiring a toy. It was like telling a child that their father was gone. Friedman knew that in his gut. He said it out loud. And the people with the budget said no. The reason for killing off recognizable Transformers was to replace them with new protagonists, and thus a new line of toys. Yet following the movie's release, sales of Transformers toys disappointed, as merchandise based on the new Autobots proved less popular than those of the previous characters. Hasbro also received multiple letters from fans upset by the killing of Optimus Prime. The business plan imploded. The new toys didn't sell. The old characters, the ones they'd killed off, were what people wanted. No less than 14 Transformers are killed in the movie. 14. The film's body count is staggering by any standard, let alone by the standard of a toy commercial aimed at children under 10. From Hasbro's standpoint, killing off all these characters came down to simple economics. Prime, Ratchet, Prowl, and their compatriots were all part of the original 1984 Generation 1 line, and Hasbro wanted to replace them with shiny new toys for kids who loved Optimus Prime. However, the Transformers Robot Massacre was akin to Walt Disney shooting Mickey Mouse to death in the middle of Fantasia. That comparison is exact. That's the scale of what happened in those theater seats in August 1986. And the studio knew, because the screenwriter had told them. Thanks to audiences' reactions to Prime's demise in the 1986 feature and a massive letter campaign, Hasbro stopped its efforts to phase out the character. But the character didn't have a figurine out in stores until 1988. So Hasbro used the return of Optimus Prime as a stopgap until they had inventory to properly capitalize on Prime's resurgence in popularity. The two-parter proved popular enough with viewers that Hasbro made sure Prime would be the toy line's figurehead for decades to come. So the chain of events runs like this. Hasbro kills Optimus Prime to sell new toys. The new toys don't sell. Children boycott. Letters pour in. Hasbro brings Prime back. Prime becomes immortal. Every version of Transformers since, every Michael Bay movie, every animated series, every game has Optimus Prime at its center. He's indestructible now, specifically because killing him once was so catastrophically costly. Ron Friedman, who tried and failed to prevent Hasbro from killing the Autobots' father figure, is even calling his memoir I Killed Optimus Prime. The man who wrote the screenplay and fought against the death scene is naming his autobiography after the one decision he couldn't stop. That title says everything, and there's one final footnote to this story that completes the irony. Hasbro intended to release the G.I. Joe animated movie in theaters with a similar business strategy in mind. Kill the old to make way for the new. The failure of Transformers at the box office ended that plan. Duke the G.I. Joe equivalent of Optimus Prime, was scripted to die in the G.I. Joe movie 2. The backlash from Transformers came in time to save him. They changed his death to a coma at the last minute. Optimus Prime dying in a theater in 1986 directly saved Duke's life in 1987. That's how seismic the Prime decision was. It reshaped a completely separate franchise in real time. There is even a famous trace of that last-second rescue still visible in the G.I. Joe movie. The dialogue around Duke was already recorded as if he were dying, and rather than redo everything, the producers simply added a single line to make clear he had only fallen into a coma. So if you watch the G.I. Joe movie, you can hear the Seam, a character who was written to die, kept alive by a hasty patch, all because a generation of Transformers fans had just shown the toy industry exactly how dangerous it is to kill the hero. One trauma prevented another. The lesson of 1986 traveled fast. The animation for the Transformers, the movie, wasn't made in America. It was made in Japan at Toei Animation, the same studio responsible for Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, and dozens of anime classics that defined entire generations. Toei Animation was contracted to animate the film, the same studio that worked on the Transformers TV series. But there's a difference between animating a weekly TV show and animating a theatrical feature film. The budget was bigger. The time was tighter, and the expectations were higher than anything Transformers had attempted before. What most fans don't know is how much of the film's visual language came directly from anime, not just in style, but in execution. The exaggerated facial expressions, the speed lines during action sequences, the way characters moved during battle. These weren't Western animation conventions. They were Toei's fingerprints all over a Hasbro property. Watch the opening sequence when Unicron devours Lithone. The way the planet breaks apart, the way debris scatters across the screen, the cinematography of the approach. It's shot like a horror film, like something out of a Godzilla movie, because that's what Toei knew how to do. They knew how to make giant mechanical things feel terrifying. There's a specific detail in that opening that shows the level of care. The Lithonians are not robots like the Transformers. They are sleeker, more organic, almost elegant, with a different design language entirely. That choice tells you the artists were thinking about more than just the main cast. They built a whole alien race for the first few minutes of the film, gave them a distinct look, and then watched Unicron eat their world. It is a complete little tragedy that exists only to establish how big the threat is. Most toy commercials would never bother. Toei bothered. The film's animation style is notably different from the TV series, more fluid, more detailed, more cinematic. The transformation sequences in the movie aren't the quick cuts and stock footage recycled from the show. They're full, elaborate sequences where you can follow every mechanical piece as it shifts and locks into place. Compare Optimus Prime's transformation in the TV series to his transformation when he first appears in the movie. In the show, it's maybe 3 seconds of repeated stock animation. In the film, it's a full sequence where you watch the truck disassemble itself and rebuild into a walking war machine. That's theatrical animation. That's Toei showing what they could do when given the time and budget. But here's where things get interesting. Toei was working on multiple projects simultaneously in 1986. They were animating Fist of the North Star, they were working on Dragon Ball, and they were handling Transformers. The same animators, the same studio, which explains why frames from Fist of the North Star ended up inside Unicron's gut, because the same artists were working on both films at the same time, and asset recycling was standard practice. It wasn't laziness, it was efficiency. In the anime industry of the 1980s, studios didn't waste time redrawing things they'd already drawn. If you had post-apocalyptic rubble from one film, you used it in another. If you had mechanical parts from Gundam, you redrew them in Transformers colors and called it a day. Western audiences had no idea. Japanese audiences might have caught it, but by then, who cares? The frame's already gone. It helps to understand how punishing the anime production schedule really was. Animators were drawing thousands of frames under brutal deadlines for relatively little pay. Cutting corners was not a moral failing. It was survival. A studio that did not reuse assets simply could not deliver on time. So the recycled frames inside Unicron are not a scandal. They are a snapshot of an entire industry running flat out. doing whatever it took to get the work done before the deadline. The wonder is not that they cut corners. The wonder is how good the finished film looks despite the corners they had to cut. The film's production was notoriously rushed. Hasbro wanted the movie ready for summer 1986 to coincide with the new toy line launch. That meant Toei had less than a year to animate an entire theatrical feature, while also keeping up with the weekly TV series production schedule. So corners were cut. Scenes were deleted mid-production because there wasn't time to finish them. Background characters disappeared between shots. Animation errors made it into the final cut because there was no time to fix them. The third moon of Cybertron exists because someone in the editing bay miscounted and nobody had time to go back and correct it. But despite all that, despite the rush, despite the chaos, despite the fact that half the production staff probably didn't speak English and had no emotional connection to American toy commercials, Toei delivered something remarkable. They delivered a film that looked like nothing else in American animation at the time. Watch the battle for Autobot City. The scale of destruction, the way the camera moves through three-dimensional space during the fight choreography, the way Prime's final battle with Megatron is framed like a Western showdown. That's not Hanna-Barbera. That's not Saturday morning cartoons. That's theatrical anime stunt animation applied to robots that turn into trucks. And here's the part that really gets overlooked. The film's color palette is darker and more muted than the TV series. The TV show was bright, primary colors designed to catch a child's eye flipping channels. The movie uses shadows. It uses grays and blacks and deep purples. Unicron isn't bright orange. He's a sickly dark rust color that looks diseased. That was a choice? Toei made Transformers look serious. They made it look dangerous. And American audiences in 1986 weren't ready for a children's film that looked like that. You can see the intention in the lighting, too. The film uses real shadow, real darkness, real moments where the screen goes nearly black except for the glow of an eye or a weapon. The TV show almost never did that. The show was lit flat and bright so it would read clearly on a small set during the day. The movie was lit for a dark theater, for an audience that had paid to sit and watch, for a story that wanted to feel like it mattered. Those are the choices of people making a film, not a commercial. Whether or not Hasbro asked for it, the artists at Toei treated this like cinema. The film's Japanese theatrical release wouldn't happen until 1989, 3 years after the American release. By then, the controversy over Prime's death had already become legend. Japanese marketing actually leaned into it. They knew what they had. A film that traumatized American children. That's a selling point in a market that gave us Grave of the Fireflies. There is one more wrinkle in the Japanese side of the story that fans love. Japan had developed its own distinct relationship with the Transformers brand, with its own continuations and its own naming conventions, and the movie had to be slotted into that. So the film arrived in Japan not as the strange tragedy that scarred American kids, but as one chapter in a larger, locally grown saga. The same 90 minutes meant something different on each side of the Pacific. In America, it was the day the hero died. In Japan, it was a piece of a bigger machine that kept turning. One film, two completely different cultural meanings, all because of how the brand had grown in each country. The Transformers, the movie opened in August 1986 with a production budget estimated between $6 and $7 million. For an animated feature at the time, that was substantial. Not Disney money, but real investment from Hasbro and Sunbow Productions. The studio expected a hit. They had 2 years of television ratings to back them up. The toy line was printing money. The characters were household names. Kids everywhere owned at least one Transformer. The math was simple. Put those characters on the big screen, and children will drag their parents to theaters. Except that's not what happened. The film grossed approximately $6 million domestically. $6 million. The exact amount it cost to make. It didn't even break even when you factor in marketing and distribution costs. By Hollywood accounting, The Transformers, the movie, was a financial disaster. But here's where the story gets complicated, because the film didn't fail due to lack of interest. It failed because of word of mouth. Specifically, word of mouth about Optimus Prime's death. Think about how movies worked in 1986. No internet, no social media, no spoiler warnings. Just kids coming out of theaters on opening weekend, crying, telling their friends what happened. And those friends told their parents. And those parents decided maybe they wouldn't take their children to see a movie that kills the main character. It is also worth remembering the competition that summer. The mid-1980s were crowded with family films and big spectacle movies, and a toy property had to fight hard for a child's allowance and a parent's afternoon. A movie can survive bad reviews if word of mouth is strong. What it cannot survive is good interest poisoned by a warning, and the warning being passed around playgrounds was the worst kind. Do not go. It will make you cry. Your hero dies. That is not a review. That is a deterrent, and it spread faster than any advertisement Hasbro could buy. The backlash wasn't just letters to Hasbro. It was parents actively boycotting the film. Reports from the time mentioned theater managers, fielding complaints from angry parents, demanding refunds, kids leaving screenings inconsolable. Some theaters started warning parents at the box office before selling tickets. By the second weekend, the damage was done. The film's box office dropped off a cliff. It limped through a brief theatrical run and disappeared. Hasbro had bet big on a theatrical event that would reset the franchise, and instead got a cautionary tale about misreading your audience. But the financial failure had a strange side effect. It made the film infamous. Kids who saw it didn't forget it. They couldn't forget it. It became the movie you survived. The movie that hurt you? And in the pre-internet era, that kind of myth-making happens through playground conversations and sleepovers. So while the theatrical run bombed, the VHS release became something else entirely. The home video release of the Transformers the movie became a cult phenomenon. Kids rented it, bought it, wore out the tapes, watching it over and over. Because once you knew Prime died, you could prepare yourself. You could study it, you could pause it and rewind it, and find all the hidden details we've been talking about. The film that failed in theaters became a rite of passage on home video. Every Transformers fan born between 1978 and 1985 has a story about watching this movie, where they were, how old they were, whether they cried. It's a shared trauma that bonded an entire generation. And here's the strangest part of the financial story. The film's failure at the box office directly led to Hasbro canceling plans for future Transformers theatrical films. The 1986 movie was supposed to be the first of many. There were plans for sequels, for expanded storylines, for a cinematic universe, before cinematic universes had a name. All of it scrapped, because $6 million domestic wasn't enough to justify the risk. So the Transformers brand retreated back to television, back to direct-to-video releases, back to the safe, predictable world of toy commercials disguised as Saturday morning cartoons. It would be 21 years before Transformers got another theatrical release. Michael Bay's 2007 live-action film, 21 years. An entire generation grew up, had children of their own, and then those children got to see Transformers on the big screen. Sit with that gap for a moment. A child who cried at Prime's death in 1986 could have been a parent taking their own kid to the Michael Bay film in 2007. The wound healed slowly enough that the people carrying it became adults before the brand dared return to theaters. And when it did return, it returned with a very different Optimus Prime, one who survives, one who delivers speeches and walks away victorious. The live-action films are, in a quiet way, an apology for 1986. They give the audience the unkillable hero that the animated movie took away. The 1986 film's box office failure didn't kill the franchise. It just killed the idea that Transformers could be a theatrical property. It taught Hasbro a lesson they wouldn't forget. Don't kill Optimus Prime. Don't traumatize the children. Keep it safe. Keep it commercial. Keep it profitable. But in doing so, they also created something they never intended. They created a film that stood apart from everything that came after. A film that took risks. A film that treated its audience like they could handle real stakes, real consequences, real loss. And decades later, that's the film people remember. Not because it was safe, but because it wasn't. There is a hard truth hiding in that. The safe choices Hasbro made afterward produced years of perfectly fine, perfectly forgettable content. The reckless choice they made in 1986 produced the one piece of Transformers media that scholars write about, that fans recite by heart, that gets preserved and restored and re-released in format after format. The failure outlived all the successes. The movie that lost money became the movie that mattered. That is the kind of irony you cannot plan for. Vince DiCola composed the film's original score, delivering a synth-heavy electronic soundscape that was unlike anything in animated films at the time. But the music that everyone remembers isn't DeColla's score. It's the licensed rock tracks that punctuate every major action sequence. The Touch by Stan Bush, Dare by Stan Bush, Instruments of Destruction by NRG, Nothing's Gonna Stand in Our Way by Spectre General. These weren't songs written for children. They were arena rock tracks with synthesizers and electric guitars and lyrics about victory and destruction and destiny. The decision to use licensed rock music in a children's animated film was unusual for 1986. Disney films used orchestral scores. Saturday morning cartoons used whatever stock music the studio had lying around. But Transformers went a different direction. It used the movie like a music video, cutting action sequences to match the beat and energy of the songs. Watch the sequence where Optimus Prime drives to Autobot City. The touch kicks in the moment he transforms. The guitar riff hits as he rolls out. The chorus swells when he crashes through the Decepticon line. The entire battle is choreographed to the music, not the other way around. That's music video editing in a theatrical film 3 years before MTV would make it standard practice. It is hard to overstate how unusual that felt at the time. Children's animation did not sound like this. It sounded like gentle orchestras or cheap synthesizer loops. It did not sound like a stadium full of electric guitars telling you that you have the touch and the power. The first time that song hits in the theater, with Prime transforming in sync with the riff, it must have felt like the movie had grabbed kids by the collar and told them this was serious now. The music gave the action weight. It told the audience to lean forward, and it worked. The soundtrack became one of the best-selling parts of the entire Transformers brand. The album sold consistently throughout the late 80s and early 90s, long after the film had left theaters. Kids who owned the VHS tape bought the cassette, played it in their Walkmans, memorized every word. The Touch specifically became something bigger than the film itself. It's been covered, remixed, and referenced in dozens of other properties. Boogie Nights used it. The 2007 Bay film almost used it before legal issues got in the way. Video games have licensed it. It's the unofficial anthem of the entire Transformers brand, a song that was rejected by Sylvester Stallone and then became immortal through robots. But here's what's interesting about DeColla's original score: the parts that aren't licensed rock tracks. Listen to the music during Unicron's scenes. It's ominous, threatening, almost horror movie atmospheric. There are moments where DeColla's score sounds like it belongs in the Terminator, not a toy commercial. The theme that plays during Prime's death is deliberately mournful, slow, melodic, emotional. It's not action music, it's funeral music. DeColla scored that scene like he was scoring the death of a king, and in the context of the film, that music told children that what they were watching mattered, that this wasn't just another episode, this was permanent. That contrast between DeColla's score and the licensed songs is the secret of the soundtrack. The rock tracks give you the highs, the charges into battle, the triumphant moments. The score gives you the dread and the grief, the planet-sized menace of Unicron, the slow death of a hero. Together they cover the full emotional range of the film, from euphoria to mourning. A lesser production would have leaned on one or the other. This one used both, and the result is a soundtrack that can make you want to run through a wall in one scene and cry in the next. Compare that to the music in the TV series. The TV show had one main theme and a handful of stock cues that got recycled week after week. The movie had a full orchestral synth score with distinct themes for different characters and locations. Unicron had his own theme. The Quintessons had their own theme. Even the Junkians had a musical identity. And then there's Dare, the other Stan Bush track that plays during the film's climax. Dare to believe you can survive. Dare to keep all your dreams alive. Dare to go where no one's gone before. It's playing when Hot Rod opens the Matrix and becomes Rodimus Prime. It's the musical representation of the torch being passed, even though nobody wanted the torch to be passed. The soundtrack's influence rippled out beyond Transformers. Other animated properties in the late 80s started incorporating licensed rock music. G.I. Joe the movie did it. My Little Pony the movie tried it. Even the Care Bears movie 2 experimented with the formula. Transformers proved that children's animation could use adult contemporary music and get away with it. But none of those films had the touch. None of them had a song that perfectly captured the emotional core of what the franchise was supposed to be about. Optimus Prime rolling into battle, transforming, and delivering justice, all set to a song about having the power and the force and the will to make it through. That's the whole character in 3 minutes of music. The soundtrack album has been reissued multiple times over the decades. Expanded editions with additional tracks, remastered editions with better sound quality, vinyl pressings for collectors. Each time it sells because the music from this film doesn't fade. It's locked into the memory of everyone who watched Transformers in the 80s. Stan Bush has performed The Touch at Transformers conventions for decades. He's released multiple new versions of the song, acoustic versions, rock versions, anniversary editions. Each one is slightly different, but the core remains. The song has outlived the film's theatrical run. It's outlived the original toy line. It's outlived entire iterations of the franchise. There's something genuinely moving about Stan Bush still singing that song decades later to rooms full of grown adults who first heard it as children. He wrote it for a Stallone movie that did not want it. It found a home in a toy film that lost money, and it became the defining anthem of a franchise and a generation. The song nobody wanted became the song everyone remembers. When Bush sings it now, he is not just performing a track, he is handing a room full of middle-aged fans a direct line back to the moment they watched their hero charge into battle as kids. And Vince DiCola's score, the parts that weren't singles, the parts that just lived in the background of the film, those tracks have been sampled, remixed, and used in fan projects for nearly 40 years. The music from the Autobot City battle shows up in YouTube compilations. The Unicron theme gets used in fan films. The Death of Optimus Prime theme is still being referenced in modern Transformers media. A children's toy commercial from 1986 has a soundtrack that's still culturally relevant in 2024. That's not an accident. That's the power of music that treated its audience like they deserved real emotional investment. Not just jingles and commercial breaks, but actual songs that meant something. Here's the problem with Hot Rod. He's not Optimus Prime. Hot Rod was introduced in the Transformers, the movie, as the young, impulsive Autobot who would eventually become Rodimus Prime. That was the plan. Kill Prime, introduce his successor. Let the new generation take over. Simple, clean, commercially logical, except the character was doomed from the moment the script was written, because Hot Rod doesn't just inherit the Matrix from Prime. He's directly responsible for Prime getting killed in the first place. Watch the scene again. Optimus Prime has Megatron beaten. He's standing over him, ready to finish it, and then Hot Rod rushes in to help. Megatron grabs Hot Rod, uses him as a shield, and shoots Prime in the gut. If Hot Rod had stayed back, Prime would have won. The movie makes that clear. Prime's death is Hot Rod's fault. Now imagine being a child in 1986, watching your hero die, and the film immediately introduces the character responsible as the new hero. That's the emotional math the filmmakers were asking audiences to do. Forgive the character who got Prime killed, then accept him as Prime's replacement. It was never going to work. There is a deeper structural problem here that the writers seem to have missed. In most stories, a hero who causes a tragedy through a mistake gets a long arc of guilt and growth before he earns redemption. He has to suffer. He has to learn. He has to prove himself over time. Hot Rod gets none of that runway. He causes the worst moment in the film, and then barely an hour of screen time later, he is handed the Matrix and crowned the new leader. The audience never gets to watch him earn it. The movie tells you to accept him, but it never shows you why you should. That missing arc is the root of the curse. Judd Nelson voiced Hot Rod with a cocky, youthful energy that was meant to contrast with Peter Cullen's gravitas as Prime. Nelson was coming off The Breakfast Club. He was the rebellious bad boy actor of the moment. Casting him was supposed to signal that Hot Rod was different, edgier, cooler, a hero for the next generation of Transformers fans. But the next generation didn't want edgy. They wanted Optimus Prime. And when Hot Rod transformed into Rodimus Prime at the film's climax, he didn't feel like a worthy successor. He felt like a replacement, a substitute, the knockoff version of the real thing. The movie tries to sell Rodimus Prime as the new leader. He opens the Matrix. He destroys Unicron from the inside. He gets the big hero moment set to dare. He literally glows with the power of the Matrix as Unicron explodes around him. It should have worked. It should have been triumphant. Instead, it felt hollow because the film spent its entire runtime making you mourn Optimus Prime, then expected you to celebrate his replacement in the final 10 minutes. The emotional arc doesn't work. The film never earns Hot Rod's ascension, and the TV series that followed the movie, Season 3 of the Transformers cartoon continued with Rodimus Prime as leader, and the ratings dropped. Kids stopped watching. Toy sales declined. Hasbro's internal research showed that children didn't want Rodimus Prime. They wanted Optimus Prime. They wanted the character back. What is interesting is that the third season actually leaned into Rodimus being unhappy with the job. He never wanted the Matrix. He never wanted to lead. He spends much of the season weighed down by a responsibility he did not ask for and does not feel ready to carry. In theory, that is a rich and relatable story. A reluctant leader crushed by the weight of expectation, doubting himself at every turn. But children did not want a depressed, self-doubting hero. They wanted the confident father figure they had lost. So the very thing that made Rodimus interesting on paper made him a chore to watch in practice. So what did Hasbro do? They brought Prime back in a 2-part episode called The Return of Optimus Prime. They resurrected him, and the moment Prime returned, Rodimus stepped down, gave up the Matrix, and went back to being Hot Rod. The show literally undid the entire point of the movie. Hot Rod's character never recovered. In every iteration of Transformers since 1986, he's been treated as a side character. Sometimes he shows up, sometimes he doesn't, but he's never the leader. He's never the main character. The movie made him toxic. The character who killed Optimus Prime, intentionally or not, became permanently associated with the worst decision Hasbro ever made. There are fan communities that have spent decades trying to rehabilitate Hot Rod's reputation, pointing out that he was just trying to help, that Prime's death wasn't really his fault, that Megatron would have found some way to cheat regardless. But it doesn't matter. The movie framed it as Hot Rod's mistake, and that framing is permanent. Judd Nelson has talked about voicing Hot Rod in interviews over the years, and there's a consistent thread in what he says. He had no idea how much fans would hate the character. He thought he was playing the hero. He thought kids would love Hot Rod the same way they loved Prime. He didn't know he was voicing the most hated character in Transformers history. It is worth being fair to Nelson here, because the performance is not the problem. He plays the part exactly as written. He brings the cocky energy, the youthful impatience, the eagerness to prove himself. He does the job well. The character fails, not because of the voice, but because of the role he was forced to fill. No actor could have made audiences accept the replacement of Optimus Prime in the final 10 minutes of a film designed to make them grieve. Nelson was handed an impossible task and performed it competently. The hatred fans feel is for the decision, not the delivery. But the two got tangled together, and Hot Rod has carried both ever since. The toy for Rodimus Prime didn't sell. Stores couldn't move inventory. Meanwhile, the original Optimus Prime toy from 1984, discontinued out of production, supposedly replaced, was selling on secondary markets for double and triple the original retail price. Parents were hunting through garage sales trying to find old Prime toys because their kids refused to accept the replacement. That's the curse of Hot Rod. He's the character who represents everything that went wrong with the Transformers. The movie. He's the living reminder of Hasbro's miscalculation, and no amount of retconning or rebooting or reimagining has ever fixed that. In later Transformers continuities, the comics, the video games, the rebooted cartoons, Hot Rod appears as a separate character from Rodimus Prime. Different personality, different role, as if the franchise itself is trying to pretend the movie version never happened. As if they can split the character in two and leave the cursed half behind. But the fans remember. The fans who were kids in 1986 remember exactly what Hot Rod represents, and they've never forgiven. Right in the middle of the Transformers, the movie, after Optimus Prime is dead, and before the climax on the planet of junk, there's a sequence that feels like it wandered in from a completely different film. The Quintessons, five-faced aliens who speak in formal legalistic language, and stage show trials for captured Transformers before feeding them to their pet Sharkticons. The whole sequence is bizarre, tonally inconsistent, and absolutely critical to the Transformers mythos going forward. Here's what happens in the scene. Cup and Hot Rod get captured. They're put on trial. The Quintesson judge has 5 faces that rotate around his head, each one representing a different emotion or verdict. He asks questions, the defendants answer, and then, regardless of the answers, The verdict is always innocent, followed immediately by feed them to the Sharkticons. It's a kangaroo court, a show trial where the outcome is predetermined, and it's played for laughs, with the Quintesson's faces spinning, and his formal language contrasting with Cup and Hot Rod's confused reactions. But underneath the humor, there's something deeply sinister. The joke of the verdict is darker than it first appears. The Quintesson finds his prisoners innocent, and then feeds them to the monsters anyway. Innocence and guilt mean nothing. The trial is theater. The outcome was decided before anyone walked in. For a children's film, that is a surprisingly bleak picture of justice. It tells you these aliens do not care about right or wrong at all. They care about the spectacle, the ritual, the feeding of the Sharkticons. The verdict is a formality on the way to the execution. Kids might have laughed at the spinning faces, but the idea underneath is genuinely chilling. The Quintessons are revealed in later Transformers media to be the creators of the Transformers themselves. They built the Autobots as consumer goods, and the Decepticons as military hardware. The entire Transformers race exists because the Quintessons wanted products to sell. And when the Transformers rebelled and gained sentience, the Quintessons lost control of their creations. Stop and appreciate how strange and pointed that backstory is. A toy company made a movie that introduced a race of aliens who manufactured the heroes as products to sell. The Autobots were the consumer line. The Decepticons were the military line. The Transformers were, quite literally, merchandise that came to life and rebelled against the company that built them. Whether or not anyone intended it, that is a near-perfect metaphor for the franchise itself. The characters Hasbro created to sell plastic became real enough in the hearts of children to rebel against being treated as nothing but product. The Quintessons are Hasbro, and the Transformers are the toys that refuse to be disposable. None of that backstory is in the 1986 film. The movie just presents the Quintessons as weird alien bureaucrats with a torture pit. But the seeds are there. The trial, the casual cruelty, the sense that the Quintessons see Transformers as objects, not beings. All of that would get expanded in the TV series that followed. What makes the sequence so strange in the context of the film is how it interrupts the momentum. You've just watched Optimus Prime die. You've just watched Ultra Magnus get blown up by the sweeps. The movie is hurtling toward its climax with Unicron, and then it stops for a 5-minute detour on a planet. That has nothing to do with the main plot. The Quintessons don't serve Unicron. They're not part of Galvatron's plan. They're just there, doing their thing, running their trials, feeding people to Sharkticons. They're a world-building detail in the middle of a movie that doesn't have time for world-building. But here's why the sequence matters. The Quintessons represent the only major addition to Transformers lore. That wasn't about the Autobot-Decepticon war. They're a third party, a glimpse at the wider universe beyond the conflict. And in a franchise that had been entirely focused on Earth and Cybertron for 2 years of TV, that expansion was radical. Later Transformers continuities would run with the Quintesson concept. The IDW comics made them central villains. The aligned continuity explored their role as creators. Every iteration of Transformers since 1986 has had to decide what to do with the Quintessons. Keep them, ignore them, or reimagine them. And the visual design of the Quintessons is unforgettable. The 5 rotating faces, the tentacles instead of legs, the ornate, almost Baroque aesthetic that clashes completely with the mechanical design of the Transformers. They look like something from H.P. Lovecraft, not a toy commercial. The Sharkticons, the shark-like robots that serve as the Quintessons' executioners, became their own toy line, which is the whole point, really. Even the weird detour sequence in the middle of the movie exists to introduce new toys. The Quintessons were designed to be action figures. The Sharkticons were designed to be army builders that kids could buy in bulk. But the execution elevates the concept. The scene where dozens of Sharkticons swarm into the pit, jaws snapping, eyes glowing, is genuinely threatening. And then Grimlock shows up, and suddenly the Dinobots are fighting an army of robot sharks in a gladiatorial arena, while a 5-faced alien judge watches from above. It's absurd. It's brilliant. And it has nothing to do with Unicron or the Matrix or the main plot. That's the Transformers, the movie in a nutshell. A film that can't decide if it's a focused narrative about leadership and sacrifice, or a sprawling universe-building exercise designed to sell as many toys as possible. possible. So it tries to be both, and sometimes it works, and sometimes you get a 5-minute Quintesson trial that derails the entire second act. But decades later, the Quintessons endure. They've appeared in more Transformers continuities than half the main cast. That weird random detour became a cornerstone of the franchise. Because even when the movie didn't know what it was doing, it was creating mythology. The Planet of Junk is exactly what it sounds like. A world made entirely of discarded scrap and debris, inhabited by the Junkians, a race of robots who speak exclusively in television, commercial catchphrases, and old movie quotes. It's one of the most creative locations in the entire film, and it almost didn't happen. The Junkians were created specifically for the movie to introduce a new type of Transformer, one that could rebuild itself from scrap parts. The concept was simple: create a race of characters who could be torn apart and reassembled, justifying a toy gimmick where kids could swap parts between figures. Modular construction, mix and match, infinite combinations, but the execution is what makes them memorable. The Junkians speak in a bizarre pidgin language constructed entirely from television and radio broadcasts they've intercepted from Earth. They communicate in advertising slogans and news sound bites and fragments of dialogue from old shows. It's like talking to someone whose entire vocabulary came from channel surfing. There is a clever bit of theme hidden in that gimmick. The Junkians are robots built from garbage who speak only in the language of advertising. They are made of the things humans threw away, and they talk in the words humans use to sell things. In a movie produced to sell toys, that is a sharp little joke. The Junkians are what happens when a culture of consumption and disposal becomes self-aware. They are trash that learned to talk, and all it learned to say was commercials. Whether the writers meant it that deeply or not, the idea lands. Eric Idle voiced Wreck-Gar, the leader of the Junkians, and he improvised most of the characters' dialogue. The script just said Junkians speak. Idle, coming straight from Monty Python, filled in the blanks with references and non sequiturs and whatever came to mind during the recording session. Half of Wreck-Gar's lines are Eric Idle doing comedy bits that happen to fit the scene, and it works. The Junkians are funny without being annoying, strange without being incomprehensible. They're comic relief in a film that desperately needed it after killing half the main cast in the first act. That timing is not an accident, even if Idle's specific lines were improvised. By the time you reach the Planet of Junk, the movie has put you through a lot. Prime is dead. Ironhide, Ratchet, Prowl, and others are gone. Ultra Magnus has been blown apart. The tone has been relentlessly heavy. The Junkians arrive at exactly the moment the audience needs to breathe. They let the film exhale, a movie that never let up on the grief, would have crushed its young audience. The Junkians are the pressure valve, and Idle's loose, playful energy is exactly the right release. But the Planet of Junk itself is the real achievement. Look at the production design. Mountains of scrap metal, towers built from old cars and broken machinery, a landscape made entirely of refuse that somehow looks lived in and functional. The Junkians didn't just end up on a trash planet, they built a civilization there. The sequence where the Junkians attack Cup, Hot Rod, and the Dinobots is pure action comedy. The Junkians tear apart and rebuild mid-battle. They ride motorcycles made from scrap. They fight with enthusiasm and creativity, treating the whole thing like a game. And then, the moment someone starts speaking their language, quoting universal greetings and TV references, they immediately become allies. That shift from enemies to friends happens in seconds. No long negotiation, no complex diplomacy, just Hot Rod figuring out how to communicate in their language, and suddenly the Junkians are on their side. It's efficient storytelling, the kind of narrative shortcut that works in a 90-minute film that's already killed Optimus Prime and introduced Unicron and doesn't have time for slow relationship building. The Junkians rebuild Ultra Magnus after the sweeps blow him apart. They piece him back together like a puzzle. And there's something oddly hopeful about that moment. The idea that even when someone is completely destroyed, they can be rebuilt, reclaimed, made whole again. It's a theme the film never explicitly states but keeps returning to. Megatron gets rebuilt into Galvatron. Ultra Magnus gets rebuilt by the Junkians. The Autobots rebuild their forces after devastating losses. Even Unicron is a kind of reconstruction. Planets devoured and repurposed into his mass. The Planet of Junk is the literalization of that theme. A world made of broken things, rebuilt into something functional, something alive. The Junkians aren't tragic figures living in a wasteland. They're thriving. They've turned garbage into a home. And then there's the music during the Junkion sequence. Dare to Be Stupid by Weird Al Yankovic plays during the fight scene. And it's perfect. The song is already a parody of Devo, and now it's soundtracking robot combat on a junk planet. It's absurd, layered on absurd. And somehow it elevates the whole sequence. Weird Al himself has spoken fondly about being part of the film over the years. And the choice of his song for that scene is perfect on a level beyond just the sound. Dare to Be Stupid is a parody, a song built entirely out of other things, a collage of references and styles. That is exactly what the Junkions are. They are a collage of intercepted broadcasts. They are a parody of communication. Putting a parody song over a scene about robots who speak only in recycled media is the kind of layered joke that rewards anyone paying attention. The form of the song matches the nature of the characters. The Junkions became fan favorites immediately. They got their own toy line. They appeared in the post-movie TV series. They've shown up in nearly every Transformers continuity since 1986. A race of characters created to sell modular toys became one of the most enduring additions to the franchise mythology. Part of that longevity is the design. The Junkions don't look like sleek military robots. They look cobbled together, improvised, like someone built them in a garage from whatever parts were lying around. In a franchise full of characters with clean lines and symmetrical designs, the Junkions stand out. But the other part is the personality. The Junkions are fun. They're weird and creative and enthusiastic. They bring energy to every scene they're in. And in a film where most of the characters are either dying or dealing with apocalyptic stakes, the Junkions offer a break. A reminder that the Transformers universe is big enough for comedy and hope alongside tragedy. The planet of junk should have been a throwaway location, a single scene in a 90-minute film, but it became iconic because the film gave it texture, character, a sense of place. The Junkions aren't just allies who help the heroes. They're a functioning society with their own culture and language and way of life. That's world building. That's the difference between a toy commercial and a film that accidentally created a mythology. Megatron doesn't die in the Transformers, the movie. That's the first thing you need to understand. Optimus Prime dies, Starscream dies. Dozens of other Transformers die. But Megatron, the primary antagonist of the entire franchise up to that point, doesn't die. He gets worse. After the battle at Autobot City, the wounded Decepticons are jettisoned into space by Starscream. Megatron, barely functional, drifts through the void until Unicron finds him, and Unicron makes him an offer. Serve me, and I will give you a new body. Destroy the matrix of leadership, and I will give you power beyond anything you've known. Refuse, and I will let you drift here forever, slowly dying in the vacuum of space. Megatron accepts, because of course he does. Megatron has spent the entire series fighting for power, and now a literal god is offering him apotheosis. So Unicron reformats him, rebuilds him, transforms him into Galvatron. There is a cruel poetry in how Megatron ends up here. The proudest, most ambitious villain in the franchise, the one who would never bow to anyone, reduced to a broken Hulk floating in space, betrayed and discarded by his own second in command. He has nothing left. No army that respects him, no body that works, no power at all. And in that lowest moment, a planet-sized god offers to rebuild him in exchange for total obedience. Megatron, who spent his whole existence refusing to serve, says yes. That is how completely he has been broken. He trades his independence for survival, and he does it gladly, because the alternative is to die alone in the dark. Watch that sequence. The way Megatron's body is torn apart and reconstructed, the way his color scheme shifts from silver and gray to purple and black, the way his voice changes. Frank Welker's menacing growl, replaced by Leonard Nimoy's cold, controlled delivery. Galvatron isn't just a new name. He's a different character, and here's what the film never quite states but heavily implies. Unicron didn't just rebuild Megatron's body. He rebuilt Megatron's mind. Galvatron is more powerful than Megatron. Stronger, faster, more destructive, but he's also less strategic, more impulsive, more prone to rage. The Megatron of the TV series was cunning, patient. He lost battles, but he always had a plan. Galvatron doesn't do plans. Galvatron just attacks. When he's questioned, he shoots the questioner. When he's challenged, he destroys the challenger. He's raw power without the tactical brilliance that made Megatron dangerous. And there's a reason for that. Unicron made Galvatron to be a weapon, a tool, not a leader. Galvatron's entire purpose is to destroy the Matrix so Unicron can devour Cybertron. Everything else is irrelevant. So Unicron stripped away the parts of Megatron that might interfere with that mission, the ambition, the long-term planning, the ego that might rebel against serving a master. What's left is a berserker, a force of destruction aimed at a single target. Leonard Nimoy's casting as Galvatron was intentional misdirection. Nimoy was Spock, logical, controlled, unemotional. Casting him as a rage-fueled killing machine is a deliberate inversion of audience expectations. You hear Leonard Nimoy's voice and expect reason, and instead, you get a character who solves every problem with firepower. What makes Nimoy's performance work is that he does not play the rage loud and sloppy. He plays it cold. Galvatron is not a screaming brute. He is precise and quiet right up until the moment he explodes, which makes the explosions more frightening. There is calculation in the cruelty. That contrast, the calm voice attached to the unstable mind, is exactly what Nimoy was built to deliver. He spent years playing the most controlled character on television. Pointing that same controlled instrument at a broken, vengeful machine creates something genuinely unsettling. The reason in the voice makes the madness underneath stand out all the more. But there's another layer to Galvatron's transformation that most people miss. Unicron also reformats Megatron's troops. Skywarp, Thundercracker, and others become Cyclonus, Scourge, and the Sweeps. So Galvatron isn't just serving Unicron alone, he's commanding an army of rebuilt Decepticons who are all loyal to Unicron's mission. The entire Decepticon command structure gets replaced in a single scene. Old guard out, new guard in, and the new guard is stronger, more ruthless, and completely under Unicron's control. This is the Decepticon version of the Toy Massacre. Just as the Autobots lose Prime and his generation, the Decepticons lose Megatron and his. The Familiar Seekers, the recognizable lieutenants, all get reformatted into new figures with new names and new molds for the toy shelf. The movie is brutally even-handed about it. Neither side keeps its leadership. Both armies get gutted and rebuilt to make room for product. The difference is that the Autobot losses were framed as tragedy, while the Decepticon losses were framed as horror. Same business decision, two different emotional coats of paint, except, and this is critical, Galvatron retains enough of Megatron's personality to chafe against being controlled. He serves Unicron because the alternative is death, but he doesn't do it willingly. There's a moment during the final battle where Galvatron tries to betray Unicron, and Unicron punishes him with pain transmitted directly into his brain. Galvatron screams, writhes, and obeys. That's the tragedy of Galvatron. He's more powerful than Megatron ever was. But he's also a slave. Megatron fought Optimus Prime as an equal. Galvatron serves Unicron as a tool. It's a promotion and a demotion simultaneously. And after the movie, in the TV series that followed, Galvatron remains the primary Decepticon leader, but he's increasingly unstable, erratic, violent even to his own troops. Because Unicron's reformatting broke something in him. The character who was once the greatest threat to the Autobots becomes a liability to his own side. The transformation from Megatron to Galvatron is the Transformers, the movie in microcosm. A change that's supposed to be an upgrade. New body, new name, new toy to sell, but ends up being a degradation. The replacement isn't better, it's just different, and the difference costs something essential. Frank Welker never forgave them for replacing his character, so they cast Leonard Nimoy and Megatron. The character Welker had voiced for 2 years was taken away from him. It's the Optimus Prime situation in reverse. Hasbro replaced a beloved character, alienated the original performer, and expected audiences to accept it because the new version had a bigger name attached. And just like with Hot Rod and Rodimus Prime, it didn't work. Fans wanted Megatron, not Galvatron, not a Leonard Nimoy sound-alike. The original, there is a happy footnote to Welker's story though. He never really lost the character. In the decades since, Frank Welker has voiced Megatron again and again across countless Transformers productions, becoming the definitive voice of the character for new generations. The role that was taken from him in 1986 came back to him many times over. So while the movie sidelined his Megatron in favor of a celebrity, history sided with Welker. He outlasted the decision. Today, when most fans imagine Megatron's voice, they imagine his. So decades later, when Transformers rebooted in various forms, Megatron came back. Galvatron became a separate character, or Galvatron got retconned into a temporary form that Megatron reverted from, or the whole Unicron reformatting storyline got quietly ignored. Because the change didn't work, the upgrade was a downgrade. And the franchise has spent nearly 40 years trying to undo what the movie did in a single scene. Unicron is a robot the size of a planet who eats other planets. That's the concept. The execution is what makes him one of the greatest villain designs in animation history. The design process for Unicron started with a simple directive: make him bigger than anything else in the franchise. Bigger than Combiners. Bigger than cities. Bigger than Cybertron itself. The ultimate threat had to be visually overwhelming. Floro Dery, the film's production designer, created Unicron's final look. The planet mode is covered in mechanical details: cities, spires, and superstructure that give scale to the size. And then the transformation sequence reveals the robot mode underneath. Watch that transformation? The way the planet cracks open, the way limbs unfold from the surface, the way the ring around Unicron becomes a weapon system. It's not a quick transformation like the Autobots and Decepticons. It's slow, methodical, inevitable. You watch this planet-sized being reconfigure itself, and the whole time, you know nothing is stopping this. That sense of inevitability is the heart of why Unicron works. Most villains in the franchise can be fought. They can be outsmarted, outgunned, or outmaneuvered. Unicron cannot. When he transforms and reaches for Cybertron, the feeling is not of a battle about to happen, but of a natural disaster arriving. He is less like an enemy general and more like an asteroid, or a god, or death itself. The slow unfolding of his body tells you that resistance is almost beside the point. He is coming, and the only question is whether anything can be saved before he arrives. The face is the key to the design. Unicron's face is asymmetrical on purpose. One eye glows orange. The other is a gaping void. His mouth opens to reveal the furnace inside where planets are consumed. He doesn't look like a robot. He looks like a mechanical demon. And the scale, every scene with Unicron reinforces how impossibly large he is. When he devours Lithone, the entire planet disappears into his maw in seconds. When he approaches Cybertron, his shadow covers continents. When his hand reaches down to grab Galvatron, the fingers are the size of skyscrapers. The sound design sells it. Unicron doesn't just speak, he rumbles. Every word Orson Welles recorded was processed through filters and effects to make him sound like a planet-sized being. Bass frequencies that you feel in your chest. Reverb that suggests impossible distances. Welles' voice was already commanding. The processing made it godlike. But here's the part that elevates Unicron from a cool villain to a genuinely unsettling presence. He's not just destroying planets. He's eating them, consuming them, taking their mass into himself. There are shots inside Unicron's body where you can see planets being digested, broken down, converted into energy. That's body horror in a children's film. The villain isn't a conqueror or a tyrant. He's a predator, and every world in the galaxy is prey. The horror runs deeper when you think about what eating means here. A conqueror wants to rule. A tyrant wants obedience. Both of those imply a future where you still exist just under their control. Unicron wants none of that. He wants you gone, broken down into raw material, absorbed into his mass, until nothing of you remains. There is no surrender that saves you, no bargain that spares you, no version of the future where you live under his rule. He is hunger with no purpose beyond more hunger. For a character in a toy movie, that is an astonishingly bleak idea, and the film never softens it. The scenes inside Unicron are some of the most visually creative in the entire film. Vast mechanical spaces, gears the size of cities, energy conduits pulsing with light. It's equal parts HR Giger and industrial factory. The heroes are tiny figures navigating a space that wasn't designed for them because it wasn't designed at all. It's Unicron's biology. And then there's the moment when Unicron transforms into robot mode while attacking Cybertron. Cybertronians watch from the surface as their planet is attacked by something that breaks every scale they understand. Imagine standing on Earth and watching a robot the size of the moon reach down to grab you. That's the terror the film conveys in a single shot. The toy, of course, couldn't capture that scale. Hasbro released an Unicron action figure that was large by toy standards, but nowhere near planet-sized. Later iterations, particularly the HasLab Unicron crowdfunded figure from 2019, got closer to the impossible ideal. But no toy could truly represent a character whose canonical height is measured in planetary diameters. The 2019 HasLab Unicron is worth a moment on its own, because it shows how much the character still means to fans. It was an enormous crowdfunded figure, expensive and ambitious, and Hasbro was not sure enough people would back it to make it real. They were wrong. Fans funded it past every stretch goal, producing one of the largest and most elaborate Transformers toys ever made. Think about what that means. The villain from a movie that lost money in 1986, the Planet Eater voiced by a dying Orson Welles, became one of the most successful collector items the brand ever produced, more than 30 years later. The film failed. The monster it created endured and then triumphed. Unicron's influence on the franchise is permanent. Every Transformers continuity since 1986 has included some version of Unicron or the concept of a planet-eating threat. Comics, cartoons, video games, live-action films. The character became the ultimate villain, the final boss that every other storyline eventually builds toward, and the design remains iconic. Fan artists draw Unicron, cosplayers attempt Unicron, tattoo artists ink Unicron onto skin. The image of the planet with the ring, the horned head, the orange glow of consumption, it's immediately recognizable nearly 40 years later. That's what happens when you design a villain correctly. You create something that transcends the film, something that becomes mythological. Unicron isn't just a Transformers character. He's the embodiment of cosmic horror in a franchise about toys. And he works because the design never compromises, never makes him cute, never makes him safe. He's a planet that eats planets, and the movie makes you believe it. The battle for Autobot City is 20 minutes long. 20 minutes of uninterrupted action in a 90-minute film. That's almost a quarter of the entire runtime dedicated to a single fight sequence, and it's the sequence that defines everything that follows. The battle begins with the Decepticons launching a full assault on Autobot City, Earth's primary Autobot base. Not a skirmish, not a raid, a full-scale invasion intended to wipe out the Autobots entirely. This isn't Saturday morning cartoon combat where nobody really gets hurt. This is war. Watch the opening shots. Decepticons transform mid-air and start firing before they land. Autobots scramble to defensive positions. The city itself transforms into a fortress, walls rising and weapons deploying. The whole sequence is chaos, smoke, explosions, bodies falling, and then characters start dying. Prowl gets shot in the chest and goes down immediately. Ratchet tries to help him and gets killed seconds later. Ironhide takes a direct hit and collapses. These aren't minor characters. These are main cast members. Characters who had been in the show since the first episode, dead in the first 5 minutes of the movie. Ironhide's death is the one that signals what kind of movie this is going to be. He is captured, helpless, and Megatron stands over him. Ironhide is not killed in the chaos of combat. He is executed at point-blank range, deliberately, while down. There is no last stand. No heroic blaze of glory, just a wounded old soldier shot in the head because he was in the way. That single moment tells the audience that the rules have changed. The villains are not playing anymore. Anyone can die at any time for no reason other than that they were caught. After Ironhide, every other character on screen feels mortal. The film doesn't linger on these deaths, doesn't give them dramatic weight. They happen in the background of the larger battle. Blink and you'll miss Ironhide dying. That's the point. This isn't a heroic sacrifice montage. This is casualties. This is what happens when the Decepticons stop pulling punches. The turning point comes when Optimus Prime arrives. Megatron must be stopped, no matter the cost, he says, and then he charges into battle solo against the entire Decepticon army. And the touch kicks in. The entire sequence is animated to the music. Prime transforms in time with the guitar riff. He crashes through the Decepticon line as the chorus swells. The camera follows him as he punches, shoots, and demolishes everything in his path. It's not just action, it's a music video. The best music video ever made about a robot truck fighting a robot gun. Prime doesn't just fight the Decepticons. He dominates them. Bone Crusher gets thrown into Scrapper. Devastator combines and Prime still takes him down. Megatron watches from inside the city as his entire army gets dismantled by a single Autobot. That's the hero Optimus Prime was in the series, the unstoppable force. The one Autobot who could turn the tide of any battle just by showing up. The movie shows you that at full power, and then it takes it away. This is the film's cruelest and smartest trick. Before it kills Prime, it gives you the single greatest display of his power you have ever seen. He arrives like a god and tears through an entire army by himself. For 2 glorious minutes, he is everything you ever believed he was. The film deliberately raises him to his highest point, makes you cheer, makes you certain that nothing can touch him, and then it drops him. The triumph is not separate from the tragedy. The triumph is the setup for the tragedy. The higher the film lifts him, the further he has to fall, and the movie knows exactly what it is doing. The fight between Prime and Megatron is personal. These two have been fighting for millions of years. This isn't strategy. This is vendetta. They call each other by name. They trade insults. And when they finally clash, it's brutal. Prime throws Megatron through walls. Megatron shoots Prime in the stomach. They grapple. They shoot at point-blank range. Neither one is holding back. This is the fight to end all fights. The final confrontation between the leaders of two armies who've been at war since before Earth existed. And Prime wins. He's standing over Megatron, gun raised, ready to finish it. One shot, that's all it would take. End the war right here. Then Hot Rod interferes. We already talked about what that moment does to Hot Rod's character, but in terms of the battle itself, it's the turning point. Megatron grabs Hot Rod, uses him as a shield, pulls out a hidden gun and shoots Prime in the chest. Multiple times, Prime goes down. But even wounded, even dying, Prime gets back up. He grabs Megatron's gun, beats him with it, and throws him across the room. Megatron is broken, defeated, barely functional. The Decepticons retreat, carrying their leader's shattered body. The Autobots won the battle, but Prime is dying. The film cuts from the highest high, Prime's triumphant arrival and single-handed victory, to the lowest low, Prime on a medical bed, systems failing, preparing to die. The tonal whiplash is intentional. The battle for Autobot City gives you everything you want from a Transformers movie. Massive action, heroic moments, Prime being incredible, and then it immediately rips it away. The cost of victory is the death of the hero. The Autobots survive, but they lose the one thing that held them together. That's war. Real war. Not the bloodless conflict of the TV series where characters got damaged and repaired week after week. This is permanent. This is consequence. The battle for Autobot City is the moment the Transformers. The movie stops being a toy commercial and starts being something else. Something that didn't care if children were ready for it. Of all the deaths in the Transformers, the movie, the one that hits differently is Starscream's. Because Starscream doesn't die in battle, he dies in a moment of pure, petty cruelty. And the film plays it as both a tragedy and a punchline. After the Decepticons retreat from Autobot City with the wounded Megatron, Starscream takes command. He orders the badly damaged Decepticons jettisoned into space to lighten the load on the ship. That includes Megatron, his own leader, the one he spent the entire television series scheming to replace. With Megatron broken and barely functional, Starscream finally gets his chance, and he takes it without hesitation. He dumps his wounded leader into the void of space like garbage. It is the moment Starscream has been waiting for across years of episodes. Every betrayal, every backstab, every plot to seize power, all of it building to this. And the movie gives it to him. For one brief stretch, Starscream actually wins. The treacherous lieutenant finally takes the throne he always believed he deserved. The film lets him have his victory, which makes what comes next so much more savage. Back on Cybertron, Starscream holds a coronation ceremony to crown himself the new leader of the Decepticons. He stands before the assembled Decepticons, wearing an absurd oversized crown and cape, soaking in the moment he's dreamed of for so long. It is ridiculous and grand and exactly the kind of self-important spectacle Starscream would stage for himself. He has finally arrived. He is finally king. And then Galvatron shows up. As Starscream is being crowned, Galvatron arrives. Starscream doesn't recognize him at first. He demands to know who this stranger is. And Galvatron simply says, "Coronation Starscream. This is bad comedy." Then he opens fire and disintegrates Starscream where he stands, reducing him to a pile of smoking ash and a hollow crown rolling on the ground. That line, "Coronation, Starscream?" This is bad comedy. It's one of the most quoted lines in the entire film, delivered in Leonard Nimoy's cold, controlled voice. And the cruelty of it is staggering. Starscream doesn't even understand that the thing killing him used to be the leader he betrayed. He dies confused, mid-celebration, never realizing that his own treachery created the very monster that ends him. He threw Megatron into space, and Megatron came back as a god to burn him alive. There is a perfect, brutal irony in it. Starscream's entire character was built on one trait. He always betrayed Megatron, and he always failed. Episode after episode, his schemes collapsed, and Megatron survived. The movie finally lets him succeed. He actually gets rid of Megatron, he actually takes the crown, and his reward for finally winning is to be vaporized by the rebuilt corpse of the leader he disposed of. His one victory is the thing that gets him killed. The film closes the loop on his whole character in a single merciless scene. Starscream's death is sudden and complete. There's no last stand, no dramatic final words, no chance to fight back. One moment, he's the king. The next, he's Ash. For a character who had been a constant presence across the series, his exit is shockingly abrupt. The film doesn't give him dignity. It gives him humiliation. He spends his final seconds being mocked by his killer. Then he simply ceases to exist. And yet, Starscream refused to stay gone. In the TV series that followed, Starscream returned as a ghost, his spark surviving his physical destruction. He spent multiple episodes as a disembodied spirit, scheming even in death, eventually possessing other bodies in his endless quest for power. The character was too good, too entertaining, too essential to lose. So the writers brought him back as a ghost, which is somehow perfectly fitting. Of course, Starscream would keep plotting even after death. Of course, his ambition would outlast his body. He is the one Decepticon whose hunger for power could not be ended even by being turned to ash. The empty crown rolling on the ground after his death became one of the lasting images of the film. It says everything. The crown he wanted so badly, the power he schemed for across the entire series, ends up as a hollow prop spinning in the dust beside his ashes. He got the throne for about 30 seconds. The throne cost him everything. That image, the crown without a king, is the whole tragedy of Starscream compressed into a single shot. Starscream's death also serves a crucial story function. It is the moment that announces Galvatron. Up to this point, the audience has watched Megatron get rebuilt, but they have not seen what the new version is truly capable of. Then Galvatron arrives and instantly, casually, destroys one of the most familiar characters in the franchise. It establishes in seconds that this is not the Megatron you knew. This is something colder and more powerful and more willing to kill. The movie uses Starscream's death to introduce the threat of Galvatron, sacrificing one icon to elevate another. In a film that systematically kills off the original cast, the Dinobots stand out for one simple reason. They survive, and they get some of the best moments in the entire movie. The Dinobots, Grimlock, Slag, Sludge, Snarl, and Swoop are a team of Autobots who transform into robotic dinosaurs. They were among the most popular characters from the original toy line, and the movie gives them a significant role. In a story drowning in death, the Dinobots bring a different energy. They are powerful, simple, and loyal, and they fight like the dinosaurs they resemble. Pure force, with no hesitation. Grimlock is the standout. Grimlock speaks in a broken caveman-style dialect, referring to himself in the third person, and using simple, blunt sentences. "Me Grimlock" became one of the most recognizable catchphrases in the franchise. That speech pattern could have made him a joke. Instead, it made him a legend. There is something deeply endearing about a creature this powerful expressing himself so simply. Grimlock does not scheme or strategize. He says what he means in the fewest possible words, and then he does it. Fans adored him for it. The Dinobots get their biggest moment in the Quintessence sequence. When Hot Rod and Cup are about to be fed to the Sharkticons, the Dinobots arrive and tear through the Quintessence arena. Grimlock leads the charge, smashing through Sharkticons, turning the execution pit into a battlefield. It is one of the most satisfying action beats in the film, precisely because it comes after so much loss. Finally, some of the old guard get to fight back and win. The Dinobots crashing into the arena is the movie letting the audience cheer again. There is also a quiet sweetness to the Dinobots that the movie sneaks in. On the planet of Junk, Wreck-Gar and the Junkians take a liking to the Dinobots, and there is a sense of camaraderie between these two groups of unusual Transformers. The Dinobots, who are often treated as too simple or too dangerous by other Autobots, find a kind of acceptance among the equally strange Junkians. Two groups of misfits recognizing each other. In a film about a family torn apart, it is a small moment of a new family forming. But the Dinobots' role in the movie also carries a sadness when you look closely. Snarl, as covered earlier, is mysteriously absent from most of the film despite being a Dinobot. He was apparently written out at the script stage, leaving the team a member short for most of their appearances. So even the Dinobots, the survivors, the crowd pleasers, were touched by the production chaos. One of their own was quietly removed, leaving the team incomplete in their own movie. The Dinobots win, but they win shorthanded, and most viewers never noticed that one of the dinosaurs was missing the whole time. Grimlock's popularity only grew after the film. In later continuities, Grimlock was often reimagined as far more intelligent and capable than his caveman speech suggested, sometimes becoming a brilliant warrior who chooses to speak simply, or a temporary leader of the Autobots. The franchise kept finding new ways to honor the character because fans never let go of him. The simple dinosaur from 1986 became one of the most enduring and beloved figures in the entire mythology, second perhaps only to Optimus Prime and Megatron themselves. The Dinobots represent something important about the movie's legacy. In a film designed to clear out the old characters and replace them with new ones, the Dinobots refused to be cleared out. They were too popular. They survived the massacre, and in surviving, they proved Hasbro's whole strategy wrong before the credits even rolled. The characters kids already loved were the ones kids wanted to keep. The Dinobots got to live because, on some level, the filmmakers knew that killing them would have been a step too far. The audience would never have forgiven losing Grimlock too. It is easy to forget that the Transformers, the movie has human characters at all. The robots dominate so completely that the people can feel like an afterthought, but the humans are there, and their presence tells you something about how the franchise saw its own audience. Spike Witwicky, the young human who had been the Autobots' closest human friend throughout the TV series, returns in the movie as an adult. He is now a grown man with a son of his own named Daniel. This is one of the quiet shocks of the film. The movie is set in 2005, nearly 20 years after the show's setting. Spike, who was a teenager helping the Autobots, has grown up. He has a family. Time has passed in this world, and the passing of time is part of what gives the movie its weight. The kids who loved the show were meant to imagine themselves growing up alongside Spike. Daniel becomes the new audience surrogate. Daniel Witwicky, Spike's young son, takes on the role that Spike used to fill, the human child caught up in the robots' war. The torch passes from one generation of humans to the next, mirroring the way the Matrix passes from Prime to Rodimus. The movie is obsessed with succession, with the old giving way to the new, and it plays that theme out among the humans, just as much as among the robots. The humans get caught up in real danger. When Galvatron's forces attack, Spike is taken hostage on one of Cybertron's moons. Daniel has to help rescue his father, putting a child at the center of a life-or-death situation. And it is during one of these moments that we get that hidden sound detail mentioned earlier. The sound used for the communicators on Star Trek is used when Daniel activates his blaster to save Spike, a child saving his father, set to a borrowed Star Trek sound effect. The small human moments are stitched together with the same recycled fabric as the rest of the film. There is genuine emotional stakes in the human story, even if it gets overshadowed. Spike's apparent willingness to detonate Cybertron's moons, even with his own people in danger, shows how high the stakes have become. If we have to blow up that moon, then it's gotta be done. The humans are not just bystanders. They make hard choices too. They face the same impossible calculations the Autobots face, the same willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. The movie treats them, briefly, as more than comic relief, but it is worth being honest. The human characters are the weakest part of the film for most viewers. After Prime dies, and Unicron looms, and Galvatron rampages, a subplot about Spike and Daniel on a moon feels small. The robots are the reason anyone watches. The humans are there partly out of habit, because the TV series always had a human point of view character, and partly because the filmmakers worried children needed a human face to relate to. They did not. The children related to the robots just fine. That was always the strange magic of Transformers. The machines were more human than the humans. Still, The choice to age Spike up and give him a son was a meaningful one. It signaled that the Transformers universe was moving forward in time, that this was not a static world where nothing ever changed, but a place where generations passed and the torch had to be handed down. The movie was telling its audience in its own way that they were growing up too. The kids who watched the show were becoming the kids who would have to carry things forward. Spike grew up, so would they. It is a gentle, almost melancholy idea buried inside an action film about robots, and it fits the movie's larger obsession with death, change, and the passing of one generation into the next. Part 17, the comic and the novelization. The movies that could have been. The film you watched in theaters was not the only version of the story that existed in 1986. There were others, and they tell the tale differently, sometimes very differently. Marvel Comics produced an official comic adaptation of the movie, published as a 3-issue series, but the adaptation was based on an earlier, non-finalized version of the script, so it differs from the final film in many details. This is one of the most fascinating artifacts surrounding the film, because it preserves a version of the story that the movie itself changed or cut. Reading the comic is like looking at an alternate timeline, a glimpse of the movie that almost was. The most striking difference is how Ultra Magnus dies. In the Marvel Comics adaptation, Ultra Magnus is torn apart by the sweeps, exactly as in the deleted animated scene. The comic preserved the brutal dismemberment death that the film removed for being too violent. So while children in theaters saw a softened version of Magnus's death, children reading the comic saw the original savage version. The comic kept what the film could not. For anyone trying to reconstruct the deleted scenes, the Marvel adaptation is a crucial piece of evidence, a printed record of the death the studio decided was too much for the screen. Other details differ too. Because it was based on an earlier draft, the comic includes character moments, lines of dialogue, and sequence orderings that do not match the final film. Some scenes play out in a different order. Some characters say different things. Some events are framed differently. Reading it side by side with the movie is a lesson in how much a story changes between draft and final cut. The bones are the same. Prime dies, Unicron threatens Cybertron. Hot Rod becomes Rodimus. But the flesh on those bones is arranged differently, sometimes revealingly so. There was also a novelization, and like the comic, it offers its own variations. Prose adaptations of the film expanded on scenes, added internal thoughts, and sometimes included material that did not appear on screen. A novelization has space. The film does not. It can tell you what a character is thinking as Prime dies. It can linger on a moment the movie rushes past. It can explain things the film leaves ambiguous. So the prose version becomes another lens on the same events, filling in gaps and smoothing over the chaos of the production. These alternate versions matter for a specific reason. They are how the cut and changed material survived. The deleted scenes of the film were partially reconstructed, not just from storyboards, but by comparing the final film against the comic, the novelization, the trailer, and the early scripts that circulated among fans. No single source tells the whole story, but put them all together and a fuller picture emerges of what the movie was originally meant to be. The comic preserves Magnus's true death. The trailer preserves the lost Unicron shots. The early scripts explain Snarl's absence and the Arbalest confusion. Each version holds a piece of the puzzle. This is part of why the film has stayed alive in fan discussion for so long. It is not a single fixed text. It is a cluster of related versions, each slightly different, each holding clues about the others. Fans have spent decades cross-referencing them, building a composite understanding of the story that no single version contains. The movie in theaters was just one expression of the story. The comic, the novel, the trailer, and the scripts are the others. Together, they form something larger and stranger than any one of them alone. And there is a poignancy to it. The official tie-in products, the things meant to simply cash in on the film, ended up being the archive that preserved the film's lost history. The merchandise outlived the negatives. When the widescreen film prints were lost, when the deleted scenes vanished, it was the comic and the novelization and the trailer, the disposable commercial spin-offs, that held onto the evidence. The cheap stuff saved the story. That is its own small irony in a movie full of them. Part 18, the marketing disaster. How Hasbro promoted a film they didn't understand. Hasbro's marketing campaign for the Transformers. The movie focused heavily on the new characters and the epic scale of the story. Posters showed Unicron looming over Cybertron. Commercials highlighted Hot Rod, Cup, and Ultra Magnus. The tagline was "Beyond Good, Beyond Evil, beyond your wildest imagination." What the marketing didn't mention was that Optimus Prime dies in the first act. That omission wasn't an accident. Hasbro knew that Prime's death would be controversial. They knew parents might object, so the marketing strategy was simple. Don't tell them. Get kids into theaters. Let them find out when it's too late to leave. It was a calculated deception, and it backfired spectacularly. Parents who took their children to the movie based on the advertising expected a fun, action-packed adventure with the characters their kids loved. Instead, they got graphic robot deaths and a traumatic hero killing in the first 30 minutes. The backlash was immediate. Theater managers reported parents demanding refunds. Some theaters started posting warnings at the box office after the first weekend. This film contains the death of Optimus Prime. Parents would read that, look at their children, and decide not to buy tickets. Word of mouth killed the film's theatrical run within 2 weeks. The TV commercials made it worse. Hasbro aired ads for the new toy line, Hot Rod, Rodimus Prime, Galvatron, during the same programming blocks where the Transformers cartoon aired. So kids watching Optimus Prime lead the Autobots on TV would see commercials advertising his replacement. The cognitive dissonance was jarring, and the toys themselves arrived in stores before the movie opened. Children could buy Rodimus Prime toys weeks before the film explained who Rodimus Prime was or why he mattered. The marketing assumed kids would be excited about new characters. Instead, kids were confused. Why is there a new Autobot leader? Where's Optimus Prime? There is a deeper failure underneath all of this. Hasbro treated the marketing the way they treated everything else about the film, as a product rollout rather than a story. You do not hide the death of a beloved character the way you hide a surprise feature in a new toy. A surprise feature delights. A hidden death betrays. The company applied product launch logic to an emotional event, and the two could not have been more mismatched. They were so focused on selling the new line that they never stopped to consider that they were ambushing their own most loyal customers. The tie-in merchandise didn't help. The official comic adaptation, the storybook versions, even the soundtrack, all of them spoiled Prime's death before the film opened wide. So the kids most invested in Transformers, the ones buying comics and reading storybooks, were the ones who found out about the death early, and they told their friends who told their friends, who told their parents not to take them to see a movie that would make them cry. Hasbro tried course correction mid-campaign. Later advertisements started emphasizing the heroic sacrifice angle. A hero will fall became part of the marketing language, but by then, the damage was done. The film's reputation as the one where Optimus Prime dies was set, and that reputation kept people away. Compare this to how Disney marketed The Lion King 8 years later. Mufasa's death was kept out of all marketing materials. No commercials showed it, no posters hinted at it. The film let audiences discover it organically, and while that death was still traumatic for children, parents didn't feel deceived. They felt like they'd experienced a powerful story. The difference between the two is instructive. Disney hid Mufasa's death too, but Disney built an entire film around making that death mean something. It came at the right moment in the story. It had emotional buildup and emotional aftermath. It was the engine of Simba's whole journey. Mufasa's death was a story beat. Prime's death was a product decision dressed up as a story beat, and audiences could feel the difference even if they could not name it. One felt earned. The other felt like a corporation killing a character to clear shelf space, which is exactly what it was. Hasbro's approach was the opposite. Hide the controversial content in marketing. Let it blindside audiences in theaters and hope the spectacle carries the film. It might have worked if the content was mildly surprising, but killing the main character isn't mildly surprising. It's a betrayal of audience trust. The international marketing faced different problems. In Japan, where the film didn't release until 1989, the marketing had to explain who these characters were to an audience that had minimal exposure to the American cartoon. So Japanese posters and commercials focused on Unicron and the scale of destruction. Prime's death was mentioned, but as a story beat, not a selling point. In the UK, where Transformers had a strong following, the marketing leaned into the rock soundtrack. Commercials played up The Touch and the other licensed songs, positioning the film as a rock and roll action movie for kids. It was a smarter approach. Sell the energy and spectacle, let the story speak for itself. But in America, Where Hasbro had the most control and the biggest investment, the marketing was a mess. Mixed messages, spoiled surprises, tone-deaf commercials that advertised replacement toys while the character being replaced was still alive on television. It's a case study in how not to market a children's film with mature themes. The failure of the marketing campaign had lasting effects on Hasbro's approach to media. After the Transformers, the movie Hasbro became much more conservative with their animated properties. G.I. Joe, the movie went straight to video instead of theaters. My Little Pony avoided killing main characters. Every subsequent Hasbro film played it safe. The 1986 film taught them that bold creative choices don't always translate to box office success. That traumatizing your core audience isn't good business. That hiding controversial content in marketing only makes the backlash worse when audiences discover it. So they stopped trying, and Transformers as a theatrical property went dormant for 21 years until Michael Bay proved that the brand could work in live action if you played it safe with the characters. Part 19, The Home Video Revolution. How VHS saved the film. The Transformers, the movie bombed in theaters, but on home video, it became a phenomenon. The VHS release hit stores in early 1987, less than a year after the theatrical run ended. And suddenly, kids who'd missed it in theaters or who'd been traumatized and wanted to process it could watch it at home, on their terms, with pause and rewind. That changed everything. In theaters, you watch the Transformers, the movie once. You experience it in real time. You can't stop Optimus Prime from dying. You can't rewind and watch the battle for Autobot City again. You sit there and it happens to you. That's what traumatized kids. The lack of control. But on VHS, you control the experience. You can skip the death scene if you want. You can rewatch Hot Rod's transformation into Rodimus Prime. You can pause on the hidden details. The second matrix in Prime's chest, the fist of the North Star frames inside Unicron, the Gundam parts in the Quintesson cells. That shift from helplessness to control is the whole reason the film's reputation turned around. In a theater, the death of Optimus Prime was something done to you. At home, it became something you could approach on your own terms. You could brace for it. You could understand it. You could even fast forward past it on the days you did not want to feel it. The film stopped being an ambush and became a text you could study. And a thing you can study is a thing you can come to love rather than just fear. The film became a treasure hunt. Kids started comparing notes. Did you see the purple Blitzwing? Did you notice Snarl in the background? Did you catch the Star Trek sound effect? The home video format turned the movie into something you studied instead of just watched. Rental stores couldn't keep it on shelves. The Transformers, the movie, became one of the most rented VHS tapes of 1987 and 1988. Kids would rent it, watch it multiple times during the rental period, return it, then rent it again a month later. Eventually, parents just bought it. It was cheaper than renting every month. And once you owned it, you could memorize it. Entire generations of fans can recite dialogue from this film, word for word, not because they tried to memorize it, because they watched it so many times that it embedded itself in memory. One shall stand, one shall fall, till all are one. I've got better things to do tonight than die. These lines are burned into the collective consciousness of anyone who grew up with Transformers in the 80s. And it happened because of VHS. The home video release also fixed something the theatrical run couldn't. Context. In theaters, you saw the movie once and had to make sense of it immediately. On home video, you could watch it after seeing the TV series episodes that followed. You understood how the story continued, how Rodimus Prime struggled with leadership, how Galvatron descended into instability. The film made more sense when you could see where it led, but there was a problem. The original VHS release was pan and scan, not widescreen. The film was shot in widescreen for theaters, but home video in the 80s meant full screen 4:3 ratio. So the VHS version cropped the image, cut off the sides of the frame, changed the composition of every shot. For years, that was the only version available. The theatrical widescreen version was lost, literally lost. The negatives misplaced or destroyed. So an entire generation watched the Transformers, the movie in a compromised format, and didn't even know it was compromised. There is something almost funny about that in hindsight. A whole generation fell in love with this film, memorized it, studied it frame by frame, and the version they were studying was missing the edges of every single shot. The composition they knew by heart was not the composition the animators drew. They were looking at a cropped window into the real film without ever realizing the window had been narrowed. The love was real even though the image was incomplete. It wasn't until the DVD era that the widescreen version resurfaced. The 20th anniversary DVD in 2006 finally presented the film as it was meant to be seen, full frame, theatrical aspect ratio, all the details visible. Fans who'd grown up with the VHS version suddenly saw shots differently. Background details that had been cropped out were now visible. The film looked bigger, more cinematic, and that's when the re-evaluation began. Critics who'd dismissed the film in 1986 started reassessing it. Retrospective reviews called it a milestone in animation, a bold narrative choice that broke the rules of children's entertainment, a film ahead of its time. The Blu-ray release in 2007 went further. Remastered audio, enhanced color correction, commentary tracks with the filmmakers explaining the production chaos and creative choices. The film was being treated as important, as something worth preserving and studying. And then the 4K release in 2018. Full restoration, film grain preserved, every frame looking as good as it possibly could, nearly 40 years after production. The film that almost disappeared entirely, the film whose negatives were lost and had to be reconstructed from archived prints, was now available in the highest possible quality. That's the power of home video. It saved the Transformers, the movie from obscurity, gave it a second life, turned a box office failure into a cult classic, and every new format, VHS to DVD to Blu-ray to 4K, brought new fans, new discoveries, new reasons to revisit it. The kids who watched it on VHS in 1987 introduced it to their kids in the 2000s. Those kids are now introducing it to their kids. The film keeps getting passed down, generation to generation, preserved in home video format like a time capsule. It didn't need a theatrical second chance. It found its audience at home, and that audience never left. Part 20. The television edits. How the movie was censored for TV. When the Transformers, the movie eventually made its way to television broadcast, it could not air the way it appeared in theaters. It was too violent, too intense, too full of death for the standards of children's television at the time. So it was cut, and the cuts tell their own story. For TV broadcast, the film was edited to remove or soften much of its violence and some of its language. Scenes of robot deaths were trimmed. A piece of profanity was altered. The whole experience was sanded down to fit broadcast standards for a children's program. The irony is hard to miss. A movie made by a toy company, aimed at children, was deemed too harsh for children's television. The very content that made the film memorable was the content that had to be removed before it could air on a Saturday morning. The most famous edit involves a single word. The film contains the line, "Oh shit," spoken by Spike during a moment of crisis as Unicron attacks. This made it one of the few children's animated films of its era to include actual profanity. For television, the line was changed. That a movie about transforming robot toys included a genuine swear word stunned a lot of parents at the time, and it remains one of the film's most cited shocks. It was another sign that this was not the safe, sanitized cartoon they expected. The film treated its world as a real, dangerous place where a character under threat might actually curse. TV could not allow that, so the word was scrubbed. The death scenes took the heaviest cuts. The various robot deaths throughout the film, already trimmed from their original animated versions for the theatrical release, were trimmed further for broadcast. The deaths that survived were made quicker, less lingering, less final. So there is a strange layering here. The original animation was the most violent. The theatrical cut softened it. The TV cut softened it again. Each version moved a little further from the brutal film the animators first drew. By the time it reached broadcast, the movie had been edited down through 3 stages of increasing caution. This matters for the same reason the deleted scenes matter. Each version of the film that exists is a different document of the same story, edited for a different audience and a different standard. The theatrical cut, the various home video releases, and the TV broadcast versions all differ in their level of violence and content. A kid who first saw the movie on TV saw a meaningfully gentler film than a kid who saw it in theaters or rented the tape. Their memories of the same movie are not quite memories of the same thing. There is a real loss in the TV edits. Beyond just the principle of it, the film's power comes from its refusal to look away from death. Prime fading to gray, Ironhide executed point blank, Starscream reduced to ash. The impact depends on the camera holding the moment, on the finality being undeniable. When you trim those moments, you do not just remove violence. You remove meaning. A death made quick and bloodless is a death made smaller. The TV cuts, made to protect children, quietly drained away some of the very weight that made the film matter to those children in the first place. And yet the broadcast versions served a purpose. Airing on TV, even in edited form, kept the film in circulation and introduced it to kids who might never have rented the tape or caught it in theaters. For some fans, a censored TV airing was their first encounter with the movie, their first exposure to Prime's death, their first glimpse of Unicron. The cuts may have weakened the film, but the broadcasts still spread it, still planted it in new minds, still grew the audience that would eventually seek out the uncut version and discover what they had been missing. The censorship history is one more layer in what makes this film so endlessly studyable. Most movies have one version. This one has many: the original animation, the theatrical cut, the comic adaptation, the novelization, the trailer, the VHS, the restored widescreen releases, and the censored TV broadcasts. Every one of them is the same story told a little differently, edited for a different purpose, preserving and removing different pieces. To truly understand the Transformers, the movie, you cannot watch one version. You have to watch them all and hold the differences in your head, and assemble from them the strange, chaotic, beautiful thing the movie always was. The Transformers, the movie, wasn't supposed to matter. It was supposed to be a 90-minute toy commercial that reset the product line and faded from memory. Instead, it became a touchstone, a reference point, a film that influenced decades of animation, storytelling, and toy marketing. The death of Optimus Prime specifically became a cultural shorthand for childhood trauma. If you want to describe a moment from children's media that hit too hard, you reference Prime's death. It's right there alongside Bambi's mother, Mufasa's fall, and Littlefoot's mother from The Land Before Time. A canonical moment of "this messed me up as a kid." What unites all those moments is that they were the first time a generation of children encountered death in a form they could not undo. A cartoon, a place that was supposed to be safe, suddenly showing them that loss is real and permanent. Prime's death belongs in that company because it did exactly that, but it did it in the unlikeliest possible setting. Bambi and Mufasa were in films built around emotion and meaning. Prime died in a movie about toys that turn into trucks. That a product launch managed to produce a moment of genuine lasting grief is part of why it stuck so hard. Nobody saw it coming, least of all the people who made it. But the influence goes deeper than just trauma. The film established story concepts that became permanent parts of the Transformers brand. Unicron, the matrix of leadership. The idea that Transformers have a mythology beyond the war between Autobots and Decepticons. Before the movie, Transformers was a war story. After the movie, Transformers was a mythology. The film introduced cosmic stakes, ancient artifacts, creator gods, the kinds of narrative elements that let the franchise expand beyond robots fighting on Earth. Every subsequent Transformers continuity has borrowed from the 1986 film, comics, cartoons, video games, live-action movies. The concepts introduced in 90 minutes have been reused and reimagined for nearly 40 years. Unicron appears in some form in almost every version of Transformers. The Matrix shows up constantly. Even the planet of junk and the Quintessons keep resurfacing. The film also influenced how other toy-based franchises approached their narratives. After seeing the backlash to Prime's death, other brands learned to be more conservative. G.I. Joe didn't kill Duke. He-Man came back after dying. No other toy franchise tried to replicate the Transformers experiment of wholesale character replacement. So in a strange way, the film's failure changed the industry. It established the boundary, the line you don't cross. You can challenge your audience. You can take risks, but you can't kill the main character in a children's film about toys? Not if you want to keep selling toys. The music became its own phenomenon. The Touch by Stan Bush has been covered, sampled, and parodied countless times. It's appeared in commercials, sports montages, and motivational videos. The song became bigger than the film. It's a generic inspirational rock track to people who've never seen Transformers. To people who have seen it, it's the sound of Optimus Prime driving into battle. The film's animation style influenced later anime and Western animation. The way Toei handled transformation sequences, the exaggerated facial expressions, the speedline action, these became standard techniques in 90s animation. Shows like Beast Wars, Reboot, and even early CGI experiments borrowed visual language from the 1986 film. And the marketing disaster became a business school case study. MBA programs used the Transformers, the movie as an example of brand mismanagement and audience miscalculation. It's taught alongside New Coke and the Edsel as products that failed not because they were bad, but because they misunderstood what customers wanted. The film also created a collector's market. Original 1986 theatrical posters sell for hundreds of dollars. Production sales go for thousands. Early VHS copies in good condition command premium prices. The film became memorabilia not because it was successful, but because it was significant. Fan films based on the Transformers the movie number in the hundreds, full animated recreations, live-action adaptations, shot-for-shot homages. The film is endlessly remade by people who grew up with it and want to put their own stamp on the story. Academic papers have been written about it. Film studies scholars analyze its narrative structure. Animation historians examine its production techniques. Marketing professors dissect its commercial failure. A toy commercial has been academically studied more thoroughly than some Oscar winners. The film appears on Best Animated Films, lists alongside Disney classics and Studio Ghibli masterpieces. It has been preserved and celebrated as culturally significant. A children's film about transforming robots that bombed at the box office is now considered important enough to preserve for future generations. And the strangest legacy of all, Optimus Prime's death in the 1986 film is why he's immortal now. Every version of Transformers since has treated Prime as untouchable. He can be injured, he can be temporarily defeated, but he doesn't die. Not permanently. Not like he did in 1986. The backlash was so severe that it protected the character forever. The attempt to replace Optimus Prime made him irreplaceable. That's the ultimate cultural impact. The film that tried to kill a character ended up immortalizing him instead. The Transformers. The movie remains one of the most important elements of the entire Transformers brand, and fictionally, it established several story concepts that have been used repeatedly since 1986, some of which, such as Unicron and the Matrix, are now central to the entire Transformers mythos. But what's remarkable is that the details we've been digging through in this video, the hidden frames, the cutscenes, the production chaos, those didn't stay buried. They kept surfacing. Decade after decade, the film keeps giving. Cybertron's third moon, the one that only exists because of an editing error, reappeared on Beast machines. Transformers in 1999, still bearing Unicron's claw marks. Writers working over a decade later spotted that impossible moon, decided it was too interesting to ignore, and made it canon. An accident became mythology. That's the kind of film this is. It is remembered as a story about death, transfiguration, guilt, and redemption, and as a milestone in animation history. A children's toy commercial. A milestone in animation history. Both things simultaneously, inseparably true. The details that keep surfacing in the fandom. The Gundam parts in the Quintesson cells, the Fist of the North Star frames inside Unicron, the Looney Tunes moment when Sludge gets hit, the hidden second Matrix, the AT-AT sound in Unicron's transformation, the Star Trek communicator tone when Daniel fires his blaster. These aren't accidents of careless production. They're the fingerprints of animators at Toei doing what skilled craftspeople do, leaving traces of themselves in the work. Easter eggs before Easter eggs had a name. Winks to other fans embedded in frames that flicker past at 24 per second. The Marvel Comics adaptation of the movie was based off a non-finalized version of the script and differs in many details from the final film. So even the official tie-in material tells a slightly different version of the story. A version where some of those cutscenes survive, where characters die in different configurations, where the movie you read and the movie you watch tell two different stories. Being adapted from an earlier draft, that's exactly how Ultra Magnus died in the Marvel Comics adaptation, torn apart, just as in the deleted animated version. The comic preserved the deleted scene that the film couldn't keep. The great irony of Optimus Prime's death, and the rest of the Transformers who were killed in the Great Massacre of 1986, is that while those deaths were a business decision, they resulted in a film that was something more than a glorified toy commercial. Transformers. The movie wasn't a particularly big success at the time, but it retains a cult following, and the death of the Autobot leader is still talked about today. 4 decades later, the film that was meant to be a product rotation, a disposal mechanism for old SKUs, is instead the emotional cornerstone of an entire generation's childhood. In 2019, it was called The Great Toy Massacre of 1986, the film that traumatized a generation of kids with a string of startling deaths. And the unseen details, the ones fans are still finding, still debating, still mapping frame by frame, are what make this more than nostalgia. Every new pair of eyes that puts this film on pause and step discovers something. The Gundam limbs, the fist of the North Star ghosts inside Unicron, the hollow second Matrix. The third moon that shouldn't exist. The sound of a dying legend processed through a synthesizer, sped up 8% and made into the most intimidating voice in animated film history. Many modern moviegoers were first introduced to Orson Welles not through Citizen Kane or The Third Man, but through an animated movie that had just as great an impact on its young audience as any Best Picture winner. Think about what that means for Wells's legacy. A man who spent his life making some of the most important films ever produced. And for an entire generation of people, their first encounter with his voice was a planet-eating robot. That should be a sad footnote. Instead, it is a strange kind of immortality. Welles wanted, more than anything, to be remembered, to keep working, to stay relevant. And here he is, decades after his death, introduced to new children every year through a movie about toys. He menaces something or other. His plan is thwarted. He tears himself apart on the screen, and in doing so, he keeps living. That's the film. That's what's hiding inside it. The recycled frames and the cut deaths, and the lost negatives and the dying legends and the business plan that failed so completely it created a masterpiece. A movie that was supposed to sell toys and instead sold a generation on the idea that stories could hurt, that heroes could fall, that even a cartoon could break your heart and mean it. And now that you've seen it, really seen it, frame by frame, layer by layer, you can't unsee